down to the public gallery. Just see if there's anybody coming in. Members, I just wish to remind you that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. So everybody in the public gallery is welcome. It's the usual faces. It's good to see you both. And obviously you're reminded that not to use mobile devices unless they're in airplane mode, and they should be muted, and you can connect to Assembly Wi-Fi. The password details are in the gallery as ever. Also, it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. Members, Alex Easton will be joining us remotely around 2 p.m, and Sinead Ennis is with us virtually also. It's proposed that the oral evidence session with the Minister of Justice and the session with the Chief Constable will be recorded by Hansard. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We are obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence our approach to matters under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. Does any member wish to declare an interest? No. Could I have it recorded that I have an immediate family member who works in the legal profession? Thank you. Deirdre, you want it?
Me, an immediate family member in the court service.
Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 1, which is apologies. We have an apology from Maurice Bradley. Maurice is ill at present, and I'm sure the committee would wish to extend its best wishes for a speedy recovery to Maurice. We're disappointed not to have him with us, but we wish him well. Item 2 is draft minutes, which are at pages 5 to 15 of your meeting pack for the meeting held on the 11th of April. Are members content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting held on the 11th of April? Yes? I just have one minor issue to raise, which is with regard to, it's on page 11 of our packs, the final paragraph with what was agreed. The committee agreed to ask the department why this consultation will last for 8 weeks as opposed to 12 weeks as with other consultations. I think in there if we could insert and in accordance with recommended standards. Members content with that? Mm-hmm. Thank you. So once that's amended, then I'll sign the minutes. I have no matters arising. I presume nobody else does either. Everything's going to be covered off in the course of today's agenda. And that takes us to agenda item 4, which is an evidence session from the Minister for Justice. So members, I would refer you to pages 17 to 82 of your pack. And pages 3 to 17 of your tabled pack. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Chair.
It's nice to see you, Minister.
And committee members and officials. Don't want to leave anybody out.
Indeed. I think we've our ground covered now. Members, the Minister of Justice, Naomi Long, the newly appointed Permanent Secretary, Hugh Widdis, and Deborah Brown, who is the Director of the Justice Delivery Directorate, are in attendance today. You're all very welcome. It's good to have you with us. We appreciate you taking the time. And Hugh would like to congratulate you on your appointment and wish you well.
Thank you, sir.
And success.
Look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. So, Minister, at this stage, I will invite you to give your presentation, and then no doubt we'll have some questions and issues we wish to raise with you and discuss with you afterwards. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to come to the committee today. I've obviously met with the Chair and the Vice Chair a number of times now since my re-election as Justice Minister, but it is good to meet with the full committee, and I know that you're all well briefed, both from my officials and from all of our external stakeholders in justice over recent months. I do value the role of the committee, and I look forward to us working together collaboratively to try to develop and deliver the departmental priorities while you carry out your important scrutiny function in that role. As the Chair has indicated, I'm joined by Hugh and by Deborah. As you know, it's his second week as Permanent Secretary, so he's getting up to speed on challenges facing the department. You already know Deborah. She's been floored by the new challenges facing the department, given that the budget has just been agreed at executive. And I know that you have a session planned later this month to look into the budget in considerably more detail. But there may be some headline issues that you wish to raise today as a result of that decision. I know colleagues have been updating you on the work of the department, and I trust that that has been helpful, and they're always, of course, happy to attend the committee at any time to brief you on current issues or emerging issues. I also just want to make a few opening remarks, and then I'm happy to take whatever questions you have. Obviously, I was pleased to be re-elected as Justice Minister and be able to return to the department. The last few weeks have been incredibly busy, meeting with partners right across the criminal justice sector, and also to see the work that is being done to improve the lives of citizens right across Northern Ireland. Last week I was able to announce £1.25 million investment in communities through the Assets Recovery Community Scheme, and shortly after re-election also launched a public awareness campaign to promote the rights of victims and witnesses. I've also had discussions with my counterparts in other jurisdictions, which I think is important in terms of ensuring best practice and that we try to find synergies and opportunities for cooperation. I've had a recent meeting with the Irish Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, and ongoing cooperation on a range of criminal justice matters between the two jurisdictions. It's clearly to the benefit of both of our citizens. I'll also update the Assembly soon on that meeting by way of an oral statement, as is the norm with the IGA arrangements. I'm particularly pleased the UK Government has also now agreed to the inclusion of Northern Ireland within scope of the UK legislation to deal with the challenges facing sub-postmasters post the Horizon scandal. It was always my view that should be the case, and we should receive equitable treatment in Northern Ireland with the rest of the UK and have those wrongful convictions overturned in the quickest possible manner. I think that it's welcome now that that is going to happen, and I was discussing with executive colleagues this morning and will be writing to yourselves around the LCM that will be required in order to make that take effect. We're already doing early engagement with our partners in the justice sector in terms of how we can hit the ground running to make sure that we can implement it quickly as well. Obviously, the role of government is to protect its citizens, keep communities safe and help them to feel secure, as well as having confidence they need to live productively and engage fully in society. So my intention is to try to build on the good work of the department over recent years, despite the many challenges that we face, and particularly I think it's relevant as we look to the programme for government, which is being considered at the moment, but also particularly the budget, which has been agreed earlier today. I cannot overstate the impact that the budget as agreed will have on the Department of Justice and indeed on all departments. There is inadequate funding from the Northern Ireland Block Grant. Justice has been historically underfunded, which compounds the problems that we face today, but no department has received what they need in order to be able to even maintain the services that they already have. And it's now, I think, for executive collectively to engage with UK Treasury to see if we can improve that situation even during the course of the year. We can, I guess, also look to how we can work through partnership, working with other departments, statutory agencies and community organisations if we're going to achieve our shared objectives. Despite our very difficult budget situation last year, we protected largely our community and voluntary sector partners because we recognised the work they did. Whilst there's very little discretionary spend within the Department of Justice, we were not glib in terms of simply saying that community and voluntary sector partners would be defunded because we recognise the valuable role they play. We will have a much more challenging environment this year, but nevertheless we want to continue that collaborative approach. I want to just move on briefly then to the legislative programme, and obviously this is something which we have engaged with the committee extensively about, and you will know that the nature of what we do in the department means that policy change often requires legislation. There is not a huge amount of policy that is not embedded in statute within the justice sector, and so that means that the legislative programme for the Department of Justice does tend to be challenging. Sorry to break that to you new members of the committee, because it tends to mean that you're a very busy committee. Doug's well aware that that's the case from his previous experience. I think it was 5 bills in 2 years, so that was some record. And I was very grateful to the committee for being able to do that. With respect, we're not going at that kind of pace in this mandate for a number of reasons. First of all, we don't have the capacity within the system generally, not just within justice, to be able to do really more than one bill, I think, per year. And so that is what the advice of Legislative Council and the Executive has been around this. But also within the department and within the justice sector, there is limited capacity to absorb significant new pieces of work. So we're having to restrict what we do. I mean, I know particularly the women's sector, those who work in the domestic abuse field and so on. Last time I think we're pretty exhausted by the level of engagement that was required to get so many pieces of legislation through, albeit that they were very keen to see that happen. I would want that to be consolidated and embedded, this mandate. The approved legislative programme, I guess, that we're hoping that will form part of this will be 3 bills, and obviously we'll work with you around this and have had this discussion. The Mixed Content Justice Bill 2024, which is the modernisation of Justice Bill, and we were hoping to introduce this in June 2024. We would follow that with the Sentencing Reform Bill, which would be introduced in spring 2025, and then a Hate Crime and Victims Bill for March 2026. Which is a smaller bill than we had originally intended around hate crime and victims, simply due to the reduced time that we have available in this mandate. Taken with the legislative reforms in the last mandate, so if you look at the 2 years of the last mandate plus the 3 years of this mandate, you have a single mandate essentially. I think that shows that we have delivered a significant volume of legislation, both through the committee and also in the department. It's not the full programme that we would have had if we had had 5 years, and there are a number of things that we have had to say will fall into the next mandate, but I think it's better to do that than to try to rush to do too much in this mandate and end up not being able to complete it. So we will obviously work. I know there's been some discussion already around my legislative programme, and I know that there's also a letter that we've tabled with you today to try to provide some reassurance and comfort, particularly around amendments to the bill that we hope to introduce. So I'm happy to take questions on that later, or if you want to discuss it first and come back to me. In terms of priorities, obviously time will permit me to speak to the entire work of the department, but I just want to draw out a few priority areas. We're particularly looking at avoidable delay in the justice system. It is important that cases are dealt with in a timely manner, and that is to the benefit of victims, witnesses and defendants. But that will require, I think, significant investment, and we are concerned, obviously, in light of a budget settlement that won't allow that investment to take place. However, there are things that we will be able to do to continue with that work in terms of procedure and practice, but we will be more constrained than I would have hoped. Modernisation of services also remains a priority, so the Vision 2030 portfolio of programmes and projects will deliver a reconfigured and modernised court and tribunals estate that support new ways of working, as well as exploiting digital and other online service and delivery channels. And I believe that you're actually viewing some of those opportunities and some of the projects that have been delivered under that scheme at other times. Another key focus obviously is continued partnership working with justice agencies to tackle domestic and sexual abuse by addressing the root causes, providing victims with protection and access to support, and then holding people who are abusive to account. The increasing prison population, you will understand, is high on our priorities. To put it in context, on the 1st of April 2021, the total prison population in Northern Ireland was 1,374. On the 1st of April this year, that had increased by 37% to 1,886. There are real operational and resourcing challenges attendant on that. For those within our care, for those who work in the prisons estate, there is a genuine challenge, and we are therefore taking a very strategic focus on reducing offending, enhancing rehabilitation interventions, and ensure those individuals are best prepared to integrate back into our communities. But we are also looking at things like the level of remand within the Northern Ireland prison population, given that it is particularly high, and that's another work stream that's being taken forward. There is a specific prison population oversight group that's working with our partners to drive that down. Finally, last but not by any means least, is budget. And so when we prepared our introduction on budget, the budget had not yet been agreed. However, it now has, but you will be aware that there are significant pressures right across the department. I've talked about increased prison population, but as you know, police numbers are also at their lowest level since formation, and over 1,000, so about 15% below the 7,500 aspiration in New Decade New Approach. Legal aid payments are forecast to be 30% higher than the baseline budget, which is a further challenge. And Probation Board is now adopting deviations from probation practice standards to manage the existing operational caseload in the context of the levels of vacancy. to put it, our probation service are all social workers, but they're not tied to the Agenda for Change budget. So as a result, they would be better paid if they were to work in the health service, and that is a challenge in terms of recruitment and particularly retention. So while many people work on probation board because they love the job, they certainly don't work there because of the salary. I could go on. I'm sure you've heard much from officials and indeed from Justice Partners, and I know you will hear more from the Chief Constable in terms of the impact that will have on frontline service delivery. And I am very grateful for your commitment to make the case to Treasury for the necessary funding for additional security and justice costs that other parts of the UK don't have. That was highlighted very clearly by the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council. But we do need to have, and we did need to have, an agreed budget for 24-25 by the end of this month. Not agreeing the budget and further delay actually carries cost as well. Realistically, and I have to be candid, we will struggle to not breach our budget limit next year and not have an overspend. It's very difficult to see how we can make the kind of changes and the depth of cuts that would be required to live within the settlement that is there. And so I'm very aware of the challenges that the Department of Finance have in producing a budget, but also acutely conscious of my own department's need and the fact that this difficult budget situation comes off the back of a period of underfunding of the Department of Justice. I also want to highlight one thing which I think is important. So we talk a lot about transformation and the need for transformation. The Department of Justice has been very good at living within its budgets and doing more for less. So you know about the additional projects we've taken on, the new things that we're doing, the innovation that is there, and yet our budget has not met pace even with inflation. We're now in a situation where had we simply had inflationary uplift since 2011, we would not have budget unmet need in this year, and that is even allowing for those extraordinary and unexpected things like, for example, the PSNI data breach, which we couldn't have predicted. We would have been in a position to be able to absorb that extra cost had we just matched inflation. Our failure to be able to do that means that we actually can't maintain service levels at this point. And so this is not something where the department has been found wanting. We have reformed legal aid. We have looked at how we can reduce our estate. We have looked at where there are opportunities for revenue raising, because of course you will be acutely aware that many of the services that we provide are on a cost recovery basis, so they are not free at the point of at the point of access as with other services. But what it has to be remembered is that almost all of our services are entirely demand led. We can't dictate what will come to court. We can't dictate what the level of crime will be. We can't dictate who will be remanded in custody or sent to prison. We can't dictate how people will be sentenced and for how long. If we try to speed up justice, the legal aid bill will increase proportionately. If we try to cut the legal aid bill, we will slow down the delivery of justice, and we will potentially damage access to justice. And I want to pay tribute to those members of this committee who attended the Access to Justice APG earlier this week, because I think that there is a really important piece of work there to be done. That's where I'm going to end my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions. But just to say that, I was Minister for 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. I was gone for just over 15 months, and I have noticed a significant challenge facing the department in terms even of capacity within the department because of the levels of vacancies that we are running with internally, in order that we don't pass on all of the pain of the budget to the partners that we work with. But it is painful. And that is not a sustainable way to run a safe justice system. I think at times the understanding of what cuts to the Department of Justice's budget, the impact on the community, is misunderstood, and I would say underestimated. That we are not talking here simply about cases taking slightly longer to go through court. We are talking about potentially catastrophic failures that could lead to life-changing experiences for people. Life-ending experiences for some people. And so we are very conscious that the degree of risk which is attendant to underfunding the justice system is a shared endeavour with the whole executive, and not something that can only be carried by the Department of Justice. If the department is not properly funded and is continually underfunded, the entire executive has to accept that the risk that's attendant on that is a shared endeavour. And not simply for the delivery partners who are providing those oversight services and protective measures, keeping people safe, protecting life, preservation of public order. Those are all key things that we have to be able to do, and we can't really dictate the demand in the system. We remain committed to innovation. We remain committed to collaborative working and to transformation. And we have some creative ideas about things that we can do even within a difficult budget settlement. But ultimately, the limitations that budgets will place on delivery and frontline services will be significant.
Mr. Thank you very much. We appreciate your candour. I think that we all accept the position that the department is in with regard to budget. Massive pressures, and we have supported, this committee has supported your call for additional money. We have expressed our concern over budget allocation and the extent to which the budget has previously been cut, and we've done that publicly in this committee and in the chamber. So we absolutely understand the position that you're in. We are aware in some circumstances you have very little flexibility. I think it's something around 5%. And within that, to make more cuts is going to ultimately, it's just about shuffling the pieces on the board, which could in turn impact services. So we're acutely conscious of that. You've noted there, Minister, I'll come to my question shortly, but I suppose there's a few housekeeping issues that we probably do need to go over and address. Members may wish to raise questions around your forthcoming bill because they've had sight now of the letter that you sent the Vice Chair and I. So our intent would be that we would have a conversation about that and then update you later, but I don't wish to preclude members from asking questions on that today. I suppose there are a couple of points that I need to make on that, which is that this committee is not bound by predecessor committees. More than that, we note that you have been at pains to say and demonstrate that this approach of bringing forward what is now, I think, 7 amendments at consideration stage is not novel nor contentious. However, I think most of us would agree that it's not an ideal way of working, given the difficulties that can ensue in terms of evidence gathering and being able to determine what the words actually are and what it means, and the unintended consequences. So the committee's position thus far has been that such modus operandi should really be the exception rather than the rule, and we should try to move away from that method for the sake of good and accountable lawmaking. That said, we do understand that for some of these issues you are under legal obligations and statutory timeframes, so we do take that into account and we will update you once we further deliberate on your letter. But I think it was important to reiterate that that had been the committee's position thus far. I'll move to questions if I may, and thank you so much for your briefing. I will admit that my day has been such that I have not seen the news to know what you have been allocated in terms of budget, but I don't imagine for a second, given your demeanour and the issues that you've outlined, that it's anywhere close to what you had bid for or what you were hopeful of receiving. So with that in mind, what is the plan and how will you prioritise?
Well, I mean, there are a few things. No minister will have come close to what they bid for. I mean, there were $3 billion of funding pressures and $1 billion of funding available. So that's the first thing. And I think some ministers' bids actually outstripped the $1 billion. So, I mean, no minister could get everything that they wanted. Our bids, first of all, I would have to say, with the exception of about £8 million for recruitment of new police officers, were all entirely inescapable pressures. So the $8 million that we had set aside for recruitment of police officers is not inescapable in that you could choose not to do it, but I think we're all very conscious of the consequences if you were to choose not to do it, and that was the only, if you like, one that we added as a novel piece, and I wouldn't even really require, I would say it was required and essential, if not inescapable. Everything else was inescapable, and there was around £440 million bid, which is about 40% of our baseline in DoJ. In terms of how we go forward to manage it, obviously the settlement is just there. We have outlined some of the consequences of the settlement and the impact that will have in frontline services. There is no way that we can insulate any particular part of the justice system from the impact of these significant challenges that we face. It is impossible to do so. And what we will try to do is, in line with the level of risk that is attendant, administer those funds in as proportionate and fair a way as we can. It's too early really for us to be talking about allocations when we have only now received our allocation at departmental level, but we only have about 1% discretionary spend in DOJ. Everything else is either contractually committed or is staff and salary related. The budget for the core department is a tiny fraction of our overall spend. So as you know, policing gets around 65% of the overall budget. The remainder, or 35%, largely provides everything else that the justice system has to deliver. So there is very little scope for us in terms of being able to, if you like, as you said, move the pieces around the board. This is more about taking pieces off the board at this stage, because business as usual won't be possible. And there is a challenge, I think, and I mean, I'll hand over to Deborah when I finish, but there is a challenge in that there are some services that you cannot salami slice. It's not enough to say, well, we'll just spread the pain evenly across all services. Some of those services will become unsustainable if they lose any money. Others will not be able to perform their functions to the required level. So we need to look very carefully at things that we will and won't do in terms of both the department and our ambitions, but also in terms of how we deliver. So it's too early to say what those things might look like, but obviously there will be an opportunity later this month when we will have a time to digest what the budget means and to engage with justice partners for us to come back and brief the committee in more detail, and you will also have the opportunity to scrutinise the budget and the settlement that we got. I can reassure you, and no doubt when you go and talk to your colleagues after today, I can reassure you that we put up a fight for the Department of Justice, as you would expect, nothing less, and we did our best. But I have to be realistic and say that with pressures 3 times the allocation, this was never going to be a good outcome, for anybody. And Justice has the 3rd largest allocation out of the budget that's there. Health is the largest, Education 2nd, and Justice 3rd, which is, in fairness, it follows the size of the departments. I would argue Justice had a call perhaps for a slightly higher allocation on the basis of previous underfunding and the impact that that's had on services. But you would expect me to say that, of course, backed up by the Fiscal Council in their assessment. So yes, of course, ministers will be disappointed, aggrieved, concerned today. But what we now need to do, I think, is gather ourselves and go back to UK Treasury and engage in the conversation that had already started around how we put Northern Ireland's funding for our public services on a sustainable footing, because it's fairly clear to me that there's a twofold pressure on us. First of all, underfunding of public services across the UK by the current government. It's clear when councils are going bankrupt in England that it's not just a Northern Ireland factor here that's affecting us. Even if we are funded to relative need, which we haven't been historically, that is as a proportion of England and Wales. So if England and Wales are underfunded, we remain underfunded relative to actual need. But from our perspective, we don't believe that need base has been met. We have made some progress in terms of the acknowledgement of a need for a shift, but I think there's more negotiation with Treasury to happen, and I know that the Department of Finance are leading for the Executive on that and have my full support in terms of trying to secure more funding. Deborah, could I maybe just hand over to you, because you obviously might be able to shine some light on the kind of challenges that you'll be wrestling with for the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Minister. So just to maybe elaborate on some of those points around the inescapable nature of the pressures that the Department is facing, our bids were for £446 million. Now, 2 million of that was for transformation bids, so our ability to actually take some new transformation forward now will be significantly restricted, and of course will need to be considered in the context of the budget settlement and the prioritisation of the budget. In that 446 million, then there's also 226 million of what we are deeming to be truly exceptional costs that the department is facing, and it's very difficult to see how the department could be expected to meet those itself. Those pressures relate to the PSNI data breach, the holiday pay, and the McLeod injury to feelings. Then looking at our business as usual, we have elements in there which are around our pay awards, and we know that we got to the settlement for the 23-24 pay awards, and as I highlighted previously, that funding has not been provided into the 24-25 year, and then on top of that you will have a 24-25 pay award. So the majority of those pressures sit in your staff, and as the Minister has outlined, we are very much front-facing, and if you start to take your staff out of your front line, that does then start to raise the issue of the safety of both the community and our staff. And the ability even to lose staff, of course, then is only attached to normal attrition. There is no vehicle to lose staff, and indeed that would have costs associated with it. Then there are other inescapable pressures associated with the increase in the employer pension contributions, which of course must be paid. The legal aid, we had bid for 27 million in that 446 million, and that was to try and start to make some progress around the backlog that we have in legal aid. I reported the last time round that we were sitting with a backlog in legal aid of around about 20 million, and that's about 12 weeks. If we do not get that £27 million or are unable to allocate it to legal aid, that would mean by March 2025 those payment times could go out to 22 weeks. And of course we know that that means that would have a significant impact on the profession and the viability of the profession, which means some of those providers could end up folding, which then means that the most vulnerable in our society are not getting their access to justice that they are entitled to. And then there are some smaller elements, and the Minister has mentioned the 8 million, which was to increase the police numbers by 145, which was the maximum they could do with their normal recruitment and attrition. Then there's also some elements around legacy inquests as well. So when you go through the list of pressures, you can clearly see that they are truly inescapable, and the Department's ability to live within the budget settlement that was agreed this morning is going to be incredibly challenging. And indeed, there will be difficult decisions in there, but whether there are sufficient decisions that could be taken in order to live with the budget remains pretty uncertain and pretty challenging and potentially unachievable.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm sure the members will have further follow-ups with regard to the budget. I kind of want to move on to a few other areas, if I may, more kind of strategic elements as well. Minister, you've indicated that speeding up justice is a priority for you, or had been a priority for you until you'd seen your budget, and you've outlined some of the curtailments that you're going to face now, but presumably you were planning that you weren't going to get the money that you were going to bid for anyway, so what action is being taken with regard to speeding up justice? What can you do within this mandate, and have you given any direction to your bodies within your department as to the types of things they should be looking at?
Well, I mean, just to reassure you, my concern is more about the delivery on this programme rather than about our commitment to it. I mean, I think there is a little more important at this stage than being able to speed up justice, because it's clear that the speed with which cases are dispatched through the courts is a real issue for victims and witnesses, their families and communities. It can actually help perpetrators better connect with the impact of their offending behaviour if they're held to account for it immediately as opposed to after a long period of time. There is also the issue that if justice is not swift, it has a deleterious impact on our economy. So all of these things are interconnected, and it is important that we're able to do the best we can with the resource we have. Criminal Justice Board reaffirmed its commitment to tackling delay in January 2023, and we have a new Speeding Up Justice work programme which we are still committed to taking forward. There are 5 work streams within that. So the first is committal reform. So one of the bills that went through the last mandate was included committal reform and taking forward changes to the committal process to remove the option for oral evidence to be heard at the traditional committal hearing, and then to implement provisions to directly commit to the Crown Court for certain offences. And that process is ongoing. The implementation of this is complex because, for example, if somebody pleads to a lesser offence that would normally be heard in the Magistrates' Court, there has to be a way to reverse them out of the Crown Court system, and that's more complex. That in itself is not the complexity. The issue is if there are bail conditions attendant on them and whether those bail conditions would fall, and we're working through all that with the LCJ and with PPS and other partners. The other issue is early engagement, so looking at opportunities for early engagement between key criminal justice stakeholders to say, are there things that we could do by engaging early in case management so that the delays that often happen or lead to adjournments are able to be eliminated. Some really progressive work is happening in terms of that work stream, particularly in the space between PPS and the police, and then also between PPS and the courts in terms of scheduling. The other one is out-of-court disposals, and so we are exploring options for diverting more low-level cases, so the less complex cases. I never like to say less serious because every crime is serious for the victim of that crime, but some cases are less complex than others and less impactful than others. And I suppose what we're trying to do is say, are there ways we can take them out of the formal justice system and deal with them by alternative methods of disposal? Some of that may need legislative underpinning, but some of that may be possible under current arrangements, and so we're looking at how we can do that. The other issue then, number 4, is remit of the Magistrates' Court. So we're exploring whether some of the lower level Crown Court cases could actually be dealt with more effectively in the Magistrates' Court and maybe more efficient use of resources, but also more appropriate for the level of offending. And so we're looking also then in that context at particular specialist courts that would take particular cadres of offender and deal with those and solely those in order to speed that process up, and particularly in those less complex cases might be able to remove some of the barriers in the system, so the time in the Crown Court is essentially reserved for the most serious of cases and that they're able to proceed more quickly. The 5th element is digital, looking at digital enhancements right across the criminal justice agencies to improve efficiency of the system, looking at legislative barriers to use of technology. So you'll be aware at the live links issues and other things, but there are other barriers to using technology within the system in terms of things needing to be notated and signed in person and so on. So we're looking at how we can improve that. Obviously COVID had a significant impact. We were actually making progress in speeding up justice in that first quarter. You could see in the kind of previous quarters, we were actually seeing the backlog in the courts drop. COVID hit, and obviously the backlogs then increased. But we are looking to say, how do we reduce demand on the system, reduce avoidable delay in the system, and make progress? The budgetary constraints, I can't deny, are an issue. Also, that means that there's increasing demand right across the justice system, so the resources to undertake these programmes of work, which, if you like, are not core work for PPS, the judiciary, police service and so on, becomes much more constrained. And that's the challenge that we have, is trying to maintain the bandwidth within our partner organisations so that they're able to continue to engage with these kind of innovative projects.
No, that's fair enough, and we accept that, thank you. I just want to... Oh, that's it from my side. I've got a couple of questions for you with regard to collaborative working in general and certainly between yourselves and health. But there's a report, I think, in front of us today that indicates that there's some criticism levelled at the department with regard to collaborative working internally within the department. So my first question is, what's being done to address silo working within the department? Then secondly, I would like you to respond to what work has been done, if any, to ascertain the extent to which justice is acting essentially in support of other departments, particularly health, and what areas have been identified for collaborative working with the Department of Health, and at what stage are those conversations and actions? Because I mean, there's a particular collaboration required between justice and health, because there are clearly people in the justice system who should not be in the justice system, and your department is picking up the slack.
Okay, well, I mean, let me start first of all with silo working within the department. I'm not sure that is necessarily my experience of the department. However, it is inevitable that when people are placed in particular roles and are focused on their particular function, that they may not be as fully aware of what other members of the team are doing in the Department of Justice. But that's my role, and I think not having a minister actually makes that much more difficult. I think having a minister means that I am getting reports from different people, and I'm saying, are we tying, for example, let me give you a tangible example. I met with the Independent Commissioner on Modern Slavery yesterday, and I have directed her to speak not just to our team on tackling slavery, modern slavery, but also to our tackling paramilitarism programme team. Because if we're looking at, for example, local victims of trafficking and exploitation, the tackling paramilitarism programme has a wealth of evidence that they could provide in that space. So I do take opportunities to say, how do we bring together different strands of work we're doing in the department? Is there learning from, for example, digital projects that we undertake in prisons? Can we learn from that and apply it somewhere else in terms of how we do digitisation there? There is generally, I think, quite good oversight, particularly through Deborah's section around where we can streamline things and work together. There will always be the odd occasion where somebody will say something and I'll go, have you spoken to this person? Because they're doing something that, not the same, because that doesn't happen, that duplication, but they may be doing something that would inform or support what you're doing. There could be synergies in working. So that will happen in any big organisation, but I do think we're pretty good at picking it up. In terms of collaborative working with the rest of the departments, look, I have said that increasingly as all departments are squeezed, justice becomes the service of last resort. So that is particularly true when people are leading complex, chaotic lives, often without housing, without education, with complex needs in terms of their mental health, communication, language and speech challenges, potentially drug addiction or substance misuse issues, and the complexity of need that we see reaching the justice system now is much greater than it would have been before. So not only is prison service being strained by numbers, but the complexity of and vulnerabilities attendant to many of the prisoners who come into our care are much more significant than would have been the case before. They may have unstatemented needs, so they've gone through their education without ever getting a statement for ADHD, for autism, for learning difficulties and so on. And as a result, have disengaged from school early, and we know that disengagement from education is one of the key risk factors in terms of offending behaviour. They will often have experienced adverse childhood experiences themselves, so have been victims of abuse or neglect, and then will, again, that's another precursor to abuse. So I think we need, what we're very good at in DOJ, even with limited resource, is evidence. So we can provide to other departments the evidence that they can then implement programmes, initiatives that will reduce offending behaviour and ultimately benefit us. We don't have the levers to do it ourselves. So it requires education, it requires health, it requires communities, it requires the economy and others. We are doing some innovative things. So, for example, we've been working particularly with health, as you know, around domestic and sexual violence and abuse. That's something where we have joint responsibility, and we work very well in that space. We do quite a bit of work around the mental health and general health in prisons. Again, it's challenging because we're coming at that from two different perspectives. There are challenges sometimes about information sharing. We're looking at some of the work that we have done, which Professor Ray Jones highlighted in his report on youth service and how youth services are delivered. We have learned some really important lessons from our work in Woodlands and driving down our juvenile population in terms of custodial environments, but also generally in contact with the system. I think that there are potential learnings for that for the secure care system and then into the community care system in terms of how we looked after children and learn the lessons of good practice that we're able to share with the Department of Health and work with them on those issues. But undoubtedly, we are seeing people who would normally have been potentially in institutionalised forms of care with very complex needs who pose a risk to themselves and potentially a risk to others now in the community, but often the community services required to manage that person appropriately are not available because of stretched resources and they end up in the prison system. I think it's indicative that 8 out of 10 calls to the PSNI are not reports of crime. they are people in distress. And so we see increasingly that's the case, and that has a toll that is sometimes invisible, but where it becomes very visible is if you go into your any department, any weekend you will see lots of police there. The reason they are there is because they can't pick somebody up at the side of the road, potentially with suicidal ideation or serious mental health issues, or who has overdosed, take them to A&E and drop them at the door. They have a duty to make sure that that person is taken care of in the system and fed through the system. But that is a resource because of the complexity of need that the police, you can't take them to the cells. It's not the right place for them. They need to be in a hospital setting to be looked after. But that takes up time and energy in policing. I was up recently, not that long ago actually, up in your neck of the woods, Ciara, and you know, the officers in Waterside said that they had a full neighbourhood team in Waterside in Altnagelvin. One Friday night, like there was nobody on the ground. They were all in Altnagelvin. Now they've come up with some really innovative solutions, working with youth workers and others to say, is there a way of handing over young people in distress to somebody who isn't a police officer but can do that accompanying work? And so we are trying to be creative and work with our partners. There are other areas I think where there are opportunities. So to talk in a more positive way about what we can do, there is some great work going on within prisons in terms of rehabilitation, and that is under pressure, and I've acknowledged that already. But what we can do is we can do things like we're looking at having skills academies within the prisons where we get local businesses to tell us what are your needs. There is a real shortage of people to be employed by employers. So businesses are telling us, hospitality, retail and others, are saying we are struggling to get workers. We have workers. We have people who desperately need employment when they leave prison, and it's critical to their rehabilitation. If we can work in partnership, and so I met with business in the community yesterday, I've been talking to other potential providers, if we can build on those partnerships, we can potentially educate and skill up people in the prison system so that when they come out, they have an opportunity to be able to start to reintegrate into society, to be able to make a contribution. And that also is ticking boxes for the Department for Economy, because what they want is not just a more vibrant economy, but a more inclusive economy so that nobody is excluded. And so there are real opportunities here. And I'm actually writing to some of my executive colleagues around this at the moment to say, yes, we are all stretched for resources, but I think we do also have opportunities for relatively small amounts of money to be able to try to partner, for example, with business who would be really keen to work with us and say, can you bring some cash to the table if we bring some cash to the table? And actually get these people who have gone through the prison system or coming out the other end and want to put their lives back together. Can you help us find them employment? Can you help us get them settled in the community? And I think the opportunities in that are actually really, I'm positive about them. So it's not all doom and gloom, but there's always that, how much resource do we have to commit to it? And that's the biggest challenge we face.
Thank you. Finally, from me, before I open to other members, just in light of what you've said, and it's been a recurrent theme on our visits to prison, and when the prison service gave evidence to us that there's a significant problem because personality disorder is not recognised. Have you had conversations with the Minister for Health around the recognition of personality disorder?
We have had conversations with the Minister of Health about, I suppose, serious mental health, personality disorder, addiction, dual diagnosis, all of those issues. And it is really challenging in terms of just how we manage that. We also have a cadre of people who end up in prison, for example, who may have acquired brain injuries and therefore lose some capacity. And we would get people with those kind of complex needs whose behaviours can be misread and misinterpreted within a prison setting. And I think one of the key things for us is, how do we identify the things that prison officers need to know in terms of somebody's health and well-being that are essential to how we provide their day-to-day care, as opposed to maintaining the privacy of the prisoner, which is absolutely right that we should in terms of their general health care. So there's a balance to be struck in that, and that's an area that we are exploring with the Minister. There is also, I think, a need, and it was highlighted by Sajini, for a secure mental health facility. Now, it was in a Sajini report which comes to the Department of Justice, and I have no worries whatsoever to produce a secure mental health unit. We are not of a scale in terms terms of population or the problem to need a Broadmoor type facility. That is not the route we would be going down. But we do need to look and say, are there secure facilities that people with serious mental health issues who either are a risk to themselves or to others, who may have offended, but because of their unmet mental health needs, for example, if they're not on their medication or they're not being whatever, is there somewhere different to prison? Because the truth is, if somebody has significant unmet mental health issues, personality disorders, other complex needs, general population in prison is not a good environment for them. It is not a therapeutic environment. More than that, though, I have said previously, CSU is not the right environment for them either. The current supervision unit in prison is not a hospital setting, it's not a therapeutic setting. It is there for prisoners who need more supervision, often because of behaviours, more protection because they might be vulnerable or whatever, but they shouldn't be there for long periods of time. The purpose of being in CSU is to work intensively with them to return them to the main population, and unfortunately it is becoming the default setting for people with complex needs. And I have to say that, and you've met obviously with the Director General, I mean, at times it is a battle to get people into the correct facility for their needs when it's obvious to us that their needs are fairly clearly not prison based.
For women, actually.
It's incredibly complicated. And also, if I could just on that, the other area that is a growing challenge for us is the ageing population in our prisons. Things like providing personal care for older people in prisons is a really challenging space because it's not something that prison officers are equipped or trained to do. But equally, it's not something that at this stage the trust is funded for. So we will have people who will be in prison for very long periods of time, and it will be very challenging.
Thank you, Minister. Very briefly, I am going to ask you, there was a situation that arose in the last budgetary period, and I don't envisage it's going to be any different this time, which was not a conflict, but a source of concern between the department and the PSNI over the balance to be struck between the Chief Constable's role to keep people safe and also his responsibilities as an accounting officer. How does the department intend to handle that going forward?
Well, the legal situation is that the Chief Constable is the accounting officer. He is responsible for living within his budget, as Hugh is responsible as the accounting officer for the department living within our budget, and that can't and won't change because it's part of the legislative framework for policing. I can't dictate to the police how they spend their money, where they put their priorities. Neither can I provide them with endless resource unless I'm willing to asset strip every other part of the justice system, which will not be effective in keeping people safe. So my responsibilities are wider than merely policing. I have to look at policing as a very significant part of that. That's why it gets the lion's share of the budget. But I also have to look at all of the other moving parts of the justice system to ensure that the entire system is able to function. There will be increasing pressures facing policing. There is no doubt that that is the case. It is the inevitable consequence of a poor budget settlement. But ultimately, the Chief Constable is the accounting officer for his funding and accountable to the policing board for how he spends it. And so it's really down now to the policing board to scrutinise the budget, to scrutinise the decisions that are going to be made, and to look at how that will be managed going forward with the Chief Constable. And I certainly don't want to trump on his toes in terms of his responsibilities. But I mean, lest anybody be under any illusions, like there is no couch down the back of the sofa in my office that I can reach for if things get tough. Like there is no, what we have is going out the door, and the police will get their fair share because we recognise what a crucial role they play.
Thank you. I'm going to open to others now, and thank you for your candour. Ciara.
I didn't realise I was first. So just thank you very much, and I welcome the Minister, Hugh and Deborah here this afternoon. I'll just want to focus in on two areas. I suppose first and foremost, I welcome the innovation in relation to skills academies, etc., regarding rehabilitation. But we're well aware, and as you know yourself, those prisoners on remand, we're talking over 700 prisoners, 36%, that are unsentenced and don't, when in relation to rehabilitation, they're out, and very many are straight back in again because of no rehabilitation. So it'll be interesting just to hear is there anything we can do, or what innovation or what work can be done in the short term that they may be there whilst in prison, and particularly in relation to maybe collaborating with other organisations, particularly the community sector, where they do go out into back out into the community, and then likewise and particularly around having no fixed abode. And is that an issue, a growing issue as well? And I'm conscious there is maybe a pilot project with the housing executive, with the prisons, and working on that. So I'd like to have a wee bit of information on that. And then just finally, in relation to the prisoner ombudsman, when are they due to be appointed? Do we have a date? Are we looking to progress that to a statutory footing? And just in relation to particularly a family that I met this week, in relation to death and custody investigations being undertaken. I recently met with a family who are currently waiting 26 months for a draft report from the Ombudsman, or just confirmation that there is a draft report, despite I know the target line is around 9 months and then 18 weeks subsequent to that. So just basically, can you provide some insight into the scale of the backlog in relation to investigations into death and custody, maybe the reason for this and what actions can be taken, particularly now given the budget? And
okay, I'll maybe start with the last first and work my way back, if I may. First of all, we ran a competition in 2023 to appoint a prisoner ombudsman, and the successful candidate accepted the role in December. However, that person decided then in January that they did not wish to take up the role. As no other candidates were deemed suitable in that round, we will have to run a new competition, and planning for that's underway. We would hope to make an appointment as quickly as possible, but there is a process that we have to go through. In the meantime, an interim arrangement is in place. So the Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice, Jackie Durkin, has agreed to provide support to the Ombudsman's Office to ensure as best she can, within resource, that work can continue in regard, for example, to progressing the investigations of very sensitive issues like deaths in custody, post-release deaths also, and any serious adverse incidents that might occur within the prison, as well as investigating complaints. I'm really grateful to Jackie for her support on this. She understands that this is challenging, and she is inheriting, I guess, a bit of a backlog because of that timeline. So I'm very appreciative of her support. The Ombudsman's Office has been impacted also by staffing issues over the last few years, which has slowed down some progress around turning those reports around as quickly as we would have hoped, particularly in those spaces of deaths in custody, post-release deaths and serious adverse incidents. So what we're trying to do in that regard is, with the interim arrangements in place, we're hoping that the number of death in custody reports will be able to be issued in the coming months. So there has to be, unlike with other work that goes on in the Ombudsman's Office, it requires an ombudsman or an interim person to sign those reports off, and we haven't had that function. So we're hoping that we'll be able to do that. In terms, my understanding is that there are around 26 outstanding reports that will need to be cleared, and that they'll be working through those in the next few months. I think there are 3 further reports being reviewed for publication, and then those will make their way through. So I think in total we're under 30 in terms of the ones that are sitting with us at the moment, and trying to make progress to get those issued as quickly as possible. Then in terms of the issue about collaboration, in terms of the work that's done with the community and voluntary sector and preparing people for rehabilitation, you are of course correct that if we cannot do the rehabilitation piece as actively with prisoners, the likelihood of reoffending increases, and we are seeing some indications of reoffending rates increasing. You're also correct to say that when somebody is on remand, they are not obliged to comply with the prison regime or rehabilitation programmes, though they may engage with the regime if they choose to do so. However, most people on remand are still denying that they are guilty of any offence at that point. They may later plead guilty to the offence or be convicted, but at that point in time they're not acknowledging their guilt, so it's very difficult to work with someone who is not acknowledging their guilt to challenge them on their offended behaviour if they don't accept they've offended. And so there's a limitation to what we can do. We can certainly provide productive activity for them, but it's harder to be able to make any inroads into the offending behaviour. It also has an impact, I have to say, on victims. So while somebody may be held on remand, and they may be held on remand for a considerable time if the justice system moves slowly, two things can happen. One is that the judge may decide that they've been on remand for too long because the offence itself wouldn't justify a prison sentence of that length on conviction, and decide to release them on bail. And that can increase risk if that person hasn't had a conviction and therefore isn't being monitored in the way we would have hoped, as just bail conditions. And the other issue, I think, which is probably worse, is that for many victims, they will get their conviction, they will feel they've had their day in court, they will be pleased, and then they will see the person walk away time served. And it feels like it was a pointless exercise because the individual who has just been convicted walks free. It's because they've served their sentence on remand, but it's still a really difficult thing for victims to come to terms with. So there are real challenges. We do have a remand working group. The difficulty with remand is that the department itself has no levers in terms of remand. What we're trying to do is bottom out. There are lots of, there are lots of theories as to why we have issues with remand. So is it about approved premises? Do we have places to bail people to? Are people able to make out their bail conditions? Some choose not to because they don't feel safe going back into the community after having been arrested for an offence. They would rather be in prison because they feel it's safer. Others can't make out their bail conditions in order to make bail for a whole host of reasons, some of which may be if they're not able to return to their original accommodation for reason of potential, for example, influencing victims or witnesses. So there are lots of moving parts in this, and we are still trying to get a handle on to what degree each of those parts is relevant. You know, the judiciary would say that they are no more likely to remand people in custody than in any other part of the UK, but equally our remand population is higher. So we are doing work on this to try to get to the very bottom and to bottom out why is our remand population higher? Because ultimately, if we can find, for example, approved premises and working with the Department for Communities to say how do we deliver that, that is a cheaper solution than holding people on remand. But it also means when that person then goes into prison, if they are subsequently convicted, that we're able to do work with them around rehabilitation. It means if they're not convicted, that they haven't been sitting in prison. Because we always imagine that somebody at the end of the remand journey will be a conviction, but at the end of the remand journey, somebody could be found not guilty, and yet they've maybe spent 7-8 months in prison, which is, you know, that is appalling, and that's not where we want to be. So people are only really remanded where they can't make secure bail or where the risk of reoffending is too high. And we need to look at that risk of reoffending piece as well, because it may be that if people, for example, were able to enter into treatment programs for either mental health or substance abuse issues, the courts may have more confidence that the risk of reoffending could be managed in the community better. But the absence of that kind of supportive environment may mean that they feel the best place for them is to be in custody. Yes.
Just in addition to what the Minister said, you were asking about, so there are other agencies and other partners coming in and helping with this. So pretty much every prisoner, if we can get the rehabilitation funding to do it, there's a personal development program for that individual, and then there's a release phase for that individual. And in that first one that I've described, the personal development bit, we do bring all sorts of partners in. So for example, communities are in with work coaches, there are psychologists in, there are other people who will train. We've got different kind of hospitality industry, we've got IT industry. We're trying to build tracks like that for everybody, and some of that is skills based and some of that is kind of personal intervention with the individual. And then I think you mentioned accommodation. So on the release plan, housing executive are now working with us at a much earlier stage in order to make sure that kind of nightmare scenario of somebody being released on a Friday night and there's nowhere to go, and then ends up in unsuitable accommodation, which just increases risk to that individual, risk to society as a whole, risk of reoffending. So we're very much working with housing executive and other partners at a much earlier stage as part of the release plan and with the individual.
Just on that specific point that Hugh has raised about the work being done by the housing executive, where they're coming in to give advice around housing and trying, even if that means that the person is simply being told which emergency accommodation or which shelter they might be going to, that can be helpful in terms of identifying where they should register for a GP. So that would allow us to get somebody registered, because often people will walk out of prison with 3 days medication. And if they're not able to access medication because they can't register with a GP, then they may end up taking illicit drugs, in order to supplement what they have in their possession. So that's an issue. And also, Hugh just mentioned in passing the issue of people being released on a Friday, and we know that that's not a good idea, where decisions are made around bail and remand and so on a Friday, and then you see somebody kind of emerge from the prison on a Friday and all the services are gone until Monday. One of the things that the Lady Chief Justice is doing as a pilot and under her own initiative is to move those sorts of decisions earlier in the week, so that people will generally be released earlier in the week and therefore have access to services. One of the key issues is that when people go into prison initially and we do the plan for them and so on, there's a lot of management. So people are supported through their journey in prison. We try, as people progress towards exit, to give them more agency over things like keeping their own appointments, knowing where they need to be, making sure they get there on time and all those things to prepare them for living outside. But nevertheless, all the services are provided for them on site, in-house. And suddenly they walk through the prison gate and it's like, you have to go here, you have to go there, you need to talk to this person, you need to make an appointment there. And it's overwhelming for many people, particularly those who are more vulnerable. And so I think we do need to find a way of supporting people through the gate. One of the things that we're talking about in terms of the business and the community meeting that we had yesterday is the degree to which, for example, would it be possible to interview prisoners for jobs while they're in prison? We have the facilities in terms of remote access. If somebody wants to apply for a job while they're in prison, that they would start when they leave, and prison and the business are supportive of it. Perhaps their first stage interview could take place while they're in, so that they have something to aim towards when they come out. It's about at each stage trying to incentivise and inspire people to keep on that journey of recovery, so that they're able to reintegrate into society, and then make sure that for the more vulnerable the right support is around. The difficulty is our responsibility ends abruptly at the gate. We can't spend money on the through the gate stuff. That immediately falls to Department for Communities, Department for Health and everybody else. So what I'm trying to say is, are there ways we can work collaboratively by bringing them into our side of the house and in through the gate to us, and then help them phase people out through the prison gates? Because ultimately it is better for society. It is better for the economy, and it is better certainly for our financial position if people who go through prison once and never go back. And it's better for them. Because there's a tendency still for people to think that if you've been in prison, all you'll ever be is an ex-prisoner. People who are in prison are lots of things, and people who leave prison become lots of things. And we need to change that mindset that prison defines your entire life. It doesn't have to in a negative way. It can actually be a transformational place in people's lives where they get back on track and are able to make a contribution, and that's what we want it to be.
Okay, Karen, thank you. You'll forgive me, Minister, members, but as ever, we're under time pressure because the Chief Constable is due in a few minutes.
I shall be brief.
I've got a list for you, Minister. I've got Stuart, then Deirdre, and then Justin. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for coming in, and welcome to your team in particular. Welcome to your new Permanent Secretary as well. Just two brief areas to cover with you. One in relation to what will inevitably be the story of today, which is the budget and the difficulties which you have very clearly articulated for us. And you made reference to having to work that budget with all of your justice partners. How do you plan to keep them on board with the very difficult constraints that you will inevitably have with that budget? And I'm thinking also, because as the Chair said, the Chief Constable is the next person through the door with us. We hear in the Assembly Chamber and other places the numbers of police officers required, or the amount of funding required for PSNI to keep it going, and that's a responsibility of your department to do that. But is there actually agreement between the department and the Chief Constable in terms of what those numbers and figures actually are? We know, for example, you can only train, I think it's 145 police officers per annum, because that's the limitations of the college. But in terms of the broad expectation, is there agreement on actually the numbers that have to be done? And just for brevity, we'll ask the second question now. You'll be aware, Minister, that the government have disgracefully passed the Rwanda bill. What impact will that have on those who are currently housed for asylum here in Northern Ireland? And I know from speaking to some colleagues who work with asylum seekers across Northern Ireland that the bill has struck a great deal of fear into that community here. And what impact will that have on your department, particularly with regards to modern slavery?
Well, there are a couple of things in that, Stuart. So very, very briefly, I think we can actually produce more than 145 graduates from the college in a year. The problem is that when you then take attrition from, so when people leave, it's net, I think 145 you end up with. So you train a lot more new people, but then people leave and so on. So it's it's net 100. In some ways, I'm going to be maybe slightly facetious in that it's kind of academic what figure we land on at the top end of the scale, because at 145 officers a year, we're not going to reach it anytime soon. So in some ways, getting into a dispute as to whether it's 7.5 or 8.5 is a moot point, because we're not even at 6.5 yet, and that's going to be a struggle to get there this year. So for me, it is about acknowledging that what we're at the minute is too low, and we all are in agreement on that. The Chief Constable and I both agree it's too low, which is why we put the bid in to try and increase numbers to the maximum we can this year. In terms of our evidence on this, well, there are a couple of things. Patton said 7,500 officers. There are a range of numbers that were in the Leapwise report, which was commissioned by the PSNI, and it's important to note that the report actually concluded that broadly aligned with the previous recommendations. Some of you will remember ACC then, Stephen Martin, had said that he reckoned it was about 7.2. The Leapwise report says that numbers should be in the region of 6.9 to 7.2, so that aligns broadly with that. I think that allows for two things. Yes, there's been an increase in population since the previous iteration of the 7.5, but also there's been an increase in technology. So, for example, one of the reasons why every police officer got a handheld digital pad was so they wouldn't have to keep going back to base to take statements and all of those things. So that should mean that more officers are on the ground. We're nowhere near 6.9 to 7.2, so we need to be realistic. It would take us 3-4 years to get there. So I think the key for us in the department is to maintain cohesion. Is also, to be fair, there is no point in us squabbling over the slice of the pie we get when we know the pie is too small. So we have to be realistic that within the justice system, we have to equitably fund the entire system. If we throw it all at policing, then what do we do with the people who are convicted? How do we get them through court? When they make arrests, where do they go next? You know, if we give it all to the courts, so we've got to make sure right across the piece that we do this properly. Because if we, for example, underinvest in probation to overinvest in prisons, then we will ultimately force more people into prison who could otherwise be monitored in the community. On your final point with respect to the Rwanda bill and the impact, I met with the Independent Commissioner, as I said yesterday, on human trafficking, and her experience is that it has been absolutely chilling. And particularly, I mean, obviously it applies in Northern Ireland. These are reserved matters. My department has no involvement at all with the issue of migration. That's a matter for the Executive Office in terms of legal and illegal migration and so on, in terms of managing the people, though it is obviously a reserved matter in terms of the overall policy. Where it does impact, and this is where the Human Slavery Commissioner was very clear, is around the fact that people who have been trafficked are afraid to come forward because they fear deportation to Rwanda. There are two things that are happening that she was able to bring to my attention, which I'm aware of from conversations that we've been having with people in the sector here. The first is that the victims themselves are afraid to disclose that they've been trafficked or to make any complaint. They want to stay under the radar because they're afraid if they rise above it that they will then be immediately placed in as illegal immigrants. We're conflating two separate issues, illegal migration and human trafficking. And the second thing is that it is creating an ethical dilemma for first responders. So if you work in a hospital, if you're a nurse, if you're a police officer going to the scene of a crime, if you're an ambulance man or a fire service person and you turn up in a house that's overcrowded and you suspect modern slavery taking place, the ethical dilemma is, do you close your eyes to that and leave those people be, knowing that they could be exploited? Or do you raise a red flag over that property and run the risk of them being deported? And that is a genuine concern. We are now treating people who have been trafficked, who are victims, as criminals, and potentially in doing that we are making the actual criminals who traffic them harder to reach. So it is a genuine concern, Stuart, and one that we're very alert to.
Thank you. Deirdre and then Justin.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Naomi, to yourself and the team. Two issues I just wanted to cover quickly was around the legal aid So I know there was obviously the independent review by Judge Burgess in terms of criminal. There's a call for evidence now in terms of civil legal aid. It's just, will there be an element of independent oversight then that you intend to look at that? Also considerations, I mean, it was touched on in terms of the budget. We know there's been a legal challenge to the department in terms of delays of payments as well, and that is a concern. But will the review also look at the amounts and thresholds, look at, I suppose, the state of legal firms and the changes that's happened over the last 15 years, and particularly for the smaller high street ones, as they're known as? There's a big concern in terms of that they could face closure, and they're the very ones that actually, as you say, impact on the most vulnerable within our communities and those that often see themselves going through the system. Also, the broader issue around how the system itself is reflective of the society out there in terms of class, gender, disability, minority ethnic background. It's normally with those more localised firms as well, you know, so it's just the unintended consequences and impacts of some of these things as well. So I'd be keen to know if there's going to be an independent review of the civil, the way there is with criminal. And one question I had around, even in terms of looking at that and looking at rates, my understanding is solicitors have to itemise all of their costs, but barristers don't. And I don't really understand that. And if there can be some feedback or follow-up as to why that is, and is that going to be looked at as part of the review. And just quickly, my other question was the Victim of Crime Commissioner. We obviously had them in a while ago at committee. Is that going to be on a statutory footing? Is that part of any of the legislation that you're thinking of bringing forward? And just around the issue of the Victims' Charter in terms of statutory powers for compliance and the needs assessment, and I suppose the important issue of third-party disclosure, third-party material. There's a concern, is there any strengthening of legislation or rules around some of the concerns that have been raised? Sorry, it was
quite a lot. I will try and be brief. So in
notes.
terms of the foundational review of legal aid, yes, we are looking at both criminal and civil in terms of looking at this. I would argue that Jon Boutcher is independent in the sense that he's not a legal aid recipient, so he's independent in that sense. But also, it's a complex system, so you need somebody who actually understands.
I'm asking, are you going to have a similar approach for the civil end of it? I know, you know, he's doing the criminal.
Well, we are looking at the issue of civil legal aid at the moment, though I think the issue there is slightly different in terms of the complexity, but I can come back to you in more detail on that. In terms of the issue that you make around the difference in how barristers and solicitors and so on, I think it really depends on how those bills are done. But there is something called the taxing master who's involved in the legal aid system, and it would be fair to say that, having been briefed on it a number of times, I would struggle to try to define for you how that system works. And it is something, yes, that we are looking at, so that we are conscious that this is public money. It has to be fully transparent and accountable. And if I'm looking at a part of the system and finding it opaque in terms of how it operates and functions, then so would the public. And so it is something that we are looking at, and we've raised with the legal profession. It's not by any means to suggest that the role of the taxing master or that the taxing master themselves are being less than open and transparent about about their dealings. They are doing their job well. The issue is about the system itself and whether or not that needs to change. So we are looking at that. The other issue that you asked about then was about access to justice, because the issue of geographical contraction. There isn't at the moment evidence of significant geographical contraction within the profession, but we're conscious these are small businesses. They have cash flow challenges like every other small business, and so if they're not being paid, legal aid is obviously also only part of their income. A large part, in some cases a small part in others. So if they're also doing housing conveyancing and other pieces of legal work, that will be a separate income stream. But for those who are more reliant on legal aid and who experience long delay in payment, it absolutely will have a knock-on effect in terms of availability. And obviously one of our challenges isn't just around administering legal aid, it is about ensuring access to justice. And that's why I welcomed earlier the idea of having that separate APG to kind of work alongside you and look at how we can improve that. The other issue then, I think you said, was the impact on diversity. And you're right, when you stop recruiting new people, or when there is some kind of a hold in the profession that people maybe drop out, there's a perception certainly that for young barristers they have to work for a number of years almost for no pay at all in order to establish their credibility before they can start to submit bills for payment. You can only do that if you have the support of wealthy family or a benefactor, which very few of us have. So you're correct in saying that's a challenge in terms of diversity. On the plus side, we have a lady Chief Justice now. I was down at the KCs when they were called to the inner bar at the start of the mandate, and the diversity there was incredible. Not just, I have to say, in terms of gender, but also in terms of the diversity of legal legal profession that they were working in, some in corporate, others in family and so on. So that there is a genuine drive within the judiciary, within the bar, and within the Law Society to promote diversity. But ultimately, the regulation, if you like, of the legal profession is a matter for the Department of Finance. It's another one of these weird things where we're responsible for the legal system, but the regulation of solicitors and so on lies with the DOF. I think the last point that you raised,
Victims of Crime.
Yes, the Victims of Crime Commissioner. Yes, hiding in open sight. We do want to put the Commissioner on a statutory footing, and it is a priority in terms of legislation. It does require us to do that. I think we can do that before the end of this mandate, but the intention would be to do it in the Hate Crime and Victims Bill. So that there are a number of issues that we need to work through in terms of consultation, in terms of how the office would be structured, and in terms of making sure that some of the challenges that we have experienced with other commissioner offices across the executive, that those are addressed at this point going forward. So we would be very keen to do that, and hopefully we'll complete a public consultation, do the preparatory work, and include that with a business case to put in that bill in 2026, and hopefully that will allow that to happen in this mandate.
Thank you, Mr. Duty. Could I ask you with regard to your statutory footing for that? Could we have that just in writing about the what was the victims' charter? Wasn't that
victims'
your
charter
other question?
Needs assessments?
I'm really conscious of keeping the Chief Constable too, who's now been waiting for 15 minutes. Justin.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, best wishes with your delayed new mandate. I've asked you a series of questions in the last month in relation to rape and sexual crimes. I'm not going to go into the detail of the questions, but I'll give you an example to ask the Minister of Justice how many officers on average are assigned to the investigation of, number one, murder cases, and number two, rape and sexual violence cases. Now, you have referred me to the police constable and to the police service for answering of those questions. Is that in keeping with the Speaker's ruling on the 8th of April 2024, whereby he's outlined that ministers must answer questions? That's not in order to simply tell MLAs to refer to someone else or to another organisation. Is it one rule for all the ministers and a separate rule for yourself?
No, but the Speaker has written and made clear that there is an exception in terms of the Department of Justice. There are tripartite arrangements put in place with the new policing rules that mean that oversight of the Chief Constable is the role of the Policing Board, and that the Chief Constable is, as I said, not only the Chief Accounting Officer but the Chief Operating Officer of the PSNI, and it would be entirely inappropriate for me either to guide how he allocates his officers or speak to his decisions and choices in that regard. It is quite in order, though, for you to pass it to your colleague who sits in the policing board to get you those figures. So there is another formal mechanism through which you can obtain those, and it is also a similarly public mechanism in that you can do that through written questions through your party colleague.
Okay, do you hold that information?
I do not hold that information. I would have no reason to hold that information because I am not the Chief Constable and they're not my staff.
There also has to be an element of independence for the police.
Yes. I mean, for me to step into that space where the Chief Constable is making those decisions or to try to hold that information would not be appropriate. And to be fair to the Speaker, he made clear that he recognised that the Justice brief was unusual in that regard.
There must be no political interference within.
Okay, I struggle with that. I'm fearful that you don't hold that information or you don't have access to that information, given that there is such a problem around sexual violence and it disproportionately impacts women and girls, and I don't understand how Justice Minister doesn't have access to that information that will
With
allow her to
respect,
proceed.
Chair, I didn't say I didn't have access to it. I have access to it. If I asked the Chief Constable, I'm sure he would be more than happy to furnish me with it.
Don't hold it.
But I don't hold it. I'm not the owner of the information, and therefore it would be inappropriate for me to answer questions on the basis of it.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Can I ask you about the data breach, where you said that that would have been dealt with within if budget increases had stayed in line with inflation? I don't quite understand how inflationary increase in the budget would have covered £116 million. Is that what you meant?
What I meant was that had our budget increased from 2011 in line with inflation, we would have had around 424 million additional funding this year, and our entire pressures were 446 million. So we would have been able to absorb the differential, and that 446 million includes the money you refer to around the data breach.
Okay, another similar question to yourself. You told me that the personal injury discount rate was not set by your department but was set by the government actuary. How does that stay in line? Now, the personal injury discount rate impacts all of us in that insurance costs here across the north are crippling for businesses, crippling for families, crippling for car drivers. And our discount rate is different than it is in Scotland, it's different than it is in the UK, England and Wales. And the discount rate was, there was secondary legislation brought forward in May 2021 where the discount rate was changed on an interim basis to minus 1.75% by the Department of Justice.
I'm going to answer this in two parts, if I may. The first part is policy, so and I can answer that. The second part is about the interim rate, and I can't.
So it's in our pack today.
Yes, but
so
also
we'll be discussing it.
I can't answer that because, as you know, I have recused myself from decisions in respect of the figure and the number because my husband is a member of a medical defence union, so I declare that interest, and I have therefore delegated that to my permanent secretary, and I made that clear during the passage of the primary legislation that you refer to in the last mandate. With respect to the policy, we do not set the personal injury discount rate. We set the parameters within which it's set, and that was set in legislation. We also set the portfolio, and then we are asked by the government actuary to confirm or deny a series of questions, which then lead to them saying what the discount rate should be. I did not answer those questions. That was answered by my previous Perm Sec because that would influence the outcome. It would influence the actual number. We do have a responsibility to set that rate, but we do not choose the rate, if that makes sense. So it is the responsibility of the department to set the rate in the sense that we have to say what it is. Yep. and bring forward the regulation, but we don't choose the rate. That is calculated by the government actuary on an independent basis, based on the legislation and the portfolio and so on, and the structures that we put in place. So that's what I mean by saying that we don't set the rate. We don't decide what it will be. With respect to the law in this regard, we have one single duty, and that is to ensure that someone who is a recipient of criminal injury payments are compensated to 100% of their entitlement. No more, no less. We cannot adjust it in light of the impact it might have on the health department or the insurance industry or any other factor. It is simply that the person who has been injured is compensated to 100%, no more, no less. That is our legal duty, and that is what the government actuary is bound by as they bring back the figure, and then we bring forward the regulation to have that take effect. Hugh, do you want to add anything just in terms of how that process works? Or?
No, but
I'm really conscious of time.
Just to say, I will absolutely take on the responsibility in terms of what the Minister has recused herself from and so on. And in relation to the right, it's been very clearly set out. So,
yes,
one quick question.
Really
you talked about catastrophic
talk.
failures that could have potentially life-changing consequences for people and potentially life-ending consequences for people as a consequence of budgetary pressures, Minister. Could you like to give us some more information on what you meant by that?
Well, I mean, the reality is that as part of the role of the justice agencies and our justice partners, we are managing Category 1 offenders, we are managing vulnerable people in prisons, we are managing people in the community who could pose a risk to themselves and to others. And if we are not able to provide the levels of supervision in terms of our statutory duties, if we do not have the funding to be able, for example, to respond, if the police are not able to respond speedily to 999 calls, if probation are not able to supervise all prisoners to the degree that they would wish, if prisons are overcrowded and potentially more dangerous, then someone can lose their life. Someone can experience life-altering consequences as a result of a crime being committed against them and them being victimised. These are serious issues. They are not trivial issues. It's not just about timing. It is actually about preservation of life and ensuring that people are safe. That is our overarching objective as a department, is keeping people safe. And if we do not have sufficient resource to be able to do that, then of course there could be catastrophic failures in the system. We do everything we can within our ability to manage that risk and to carefully manage that risk. But as things become more strained, undoubtedly that risk will continue to increase.
Okay, Justin, happy
Thank you,
enough?
Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Doug, briefly.
Yes, and I will be. Thank you, Chair. I just want to tap onto something that Deirdre said, and that's about the Victims of Crime Commissioner. I absolutely get that you want to bring it in the hate crime legislative programme, but could you consider bringing it in the miscellaneous bill? Because I really think it'd be useful to have the Victims of Crime Commissioner on a statutory footing before we go into the sentencing reform. I think that could add real value to that. So that's just a plea, and I don't necessarily need an answer.
I think it's important that I give you one, though.
and I'll accept that.
So can you please make it short?
But on the sentencing reform, Minister, look, there is a
Try
real...
not to bring forward just an amendment is the other thing.
Yeah, there is a real lack of confidence on the sentencing here in Northern Ireland, and particularly this 50-50 style of sentencing that we have here. And could I ask, will you have a look at that, please, as well, within that sentencing bill? And the last one is a question that I asked you and you kindly answered, that we're paying £500,000 for 6.5 staff from His Majesty's Prisons and Probation Service to look after our TROs. We have 42 TROs here in Northern Ireland. Some are out on licence, clearly some are behind bars. I never supported that, using this outside agency to do this, Minister, and at that cost for that number of people working on this, is there any way of reviewing that in the coming years? Because I do know that our own probation service still deal with some of our TROs in the separated prison regime.
Very quickly, decanter through these. First of all, the 50-50 stuff that you refer to, that is not an automatic provision with all sentences. So I think there's more conversation perhaps that we need to have with my officials. I think there's a misunderstanding that everybody is entitled to 50% remission of sentence. That is not the case. And I think we need to bottom that out, because I think there's confusion around that based on some of the conversation that we've had. The issue of MARAC has been extremely effective. People will know the history of this, where probation staff were being threatened and were unable to do any monitoring of TROs for some time, placing the community at significant risk of harm, and indeed placing our peace process at significant risk of harm as a result of the lack of supervision and the challenges around that. The MARAC situation has been done to allow us to be able to effectively monitor and supervise prisoners and make good choices, ex-prisoners, in terms of making good choices about their management. It has been very effective. It will be reviewed as of right anyway, because we're going through that process.
We're due to get a briefing from them very shortly.
But I think it's important. Well, we're due to get a briefing because obviously it's a sensitive issue. But I have to say that it has worked. In terms of managing TROs. It is a sensitive area. It's also a very important one in terms of safety and security, and it's one that I think we can't, we can't simply abrogate responsibility for, given the sensitivities of it, nor can we place people who live within the community at additional risk of harm when they're carrying out their duties in probation. And the other issue I think you raised, if I'm correct, was about could we advance the Statutory Commissioner for Victims of Crime. I don't want to be cheeky on my way out the door, Doug, but it would require further amendment to the 7 that you're already objecting to. So the answer to that is a no, because even were we able to consider that, first of all, it would have to be an amendment, but more than that, we wouldn't have time to do the policy development I described. We have to go to consultation on this. We have to do the policy development. We have to consult with other justice partners. But I do want to reassure you, when it comes to the sentencing bill and when it comes to the Commissioner Designate, the Commissioner Designate is already fulfilling a significant role, is already influencing the system in a really constructive way. We see her as a critical friend. She rightly holds us to account and holds our feet to the fire if she thinks we're getting it wrong, but she also invests time and energy early in policy development, including on these sentencing issues, to ensure that we're getting the balance right. So I think that the statutory footing is more about her ability, frankly, to hold other agencies to account than to be able to collaborate and work with the department. So it wouldn't be exercised about that. It wouldn't be possible to expedite it. And I think if we rush it through without having done due diligence, we actually risk creating issues in that office that we may live to regret. So I think the right time to do it is in the Hate Crime and Victims Bill. But there's no barrier to her participating in the interim.
Fair enough.
And we're
Thank
relieved
you.
to hear you say that.
Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much. You have been generous with your time and your answers. We appreciate
As
you
have
coming.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Very appreciative of your time.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hugh, all the very best. Deborah, thank you once again. And no doubt we'll see you again in due course. Thank you very much, Minister. All the best. Thanks. Bye. Okay, members. There's a very brief period while the Chief comes in and gets settled for anybody who wishes to refresh.
Do you want to pop up?
I'm going to leave. I have another meeting.
Oh, enjoy.
But as quickly as everybody can. Look, I'm really conscious that the Chief has an hour, max. I think that we need to make the most of our questions to him and try and be as strategic as we can. Because it's not, we're not the policing board.
We've got a budget briefing to do it at 3:30, unfortunately, so we have to step out. Is that, you okay with it, people-wise?
I don't know how that leaves us. If Sinead and Alex are there, Deirdre, Ciara, me, Justin.
You're right, yeah.
Thank you, yes. Chief Constable, how are you? He's indicated, has he? Lovely, thank you. Chief Constable, while you're settling in,
I'm trying to undo my jacket.
yeah. Could I apologise for the delay? Our session with the Minister overran, so apologies for keeping you waiting and thank you for your patience. You're very welcome to this, your first time in front of the Justice Committee, or certainly this committee anyway. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see. Oh. Right, members, in terms of our internal housekeeping, if I could refer you to pages 83 to 99 of your meeting pack for the relevant information. And obviously the Chief Constable, Jon Boutcher, is with us to give an overview of the work of the PSNI. I would caution members that we are not the policing board. I've got you, Alex. Thank you. And Chief, just lest it be mistaken, Stuart and Doug need to leave at some point in the course of the briefing, so don't be taking offence. It's just that some folks have another place to be. So
No worries.
all right, Chief, I will invite you to give us your remarks, and then members will have questions for you. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to the committee. It's very good to be here. It's good to see the committee up and working as well. A much better place than we've been in recent times. I wrote to a number of key stakeholders, including the committee, earlier this week, setting out, and obviously extremely timely at the moment, our financial position with regards to the Police Service of Northern Ireland. I know I've made a number of remarks publicly about this, but because this is my first appearance here, I do think it's quite important that I just set out that landscape, because it is the cause and effect of everything we can or cannot do. So in 2010, the budget for the PSNI was £903 million. The budget for health in 2010 was £3.5 billion. and the budget for education was 2.7 billion. The PS&I budget has gone down in real terms and with inflation in excess of 30% since that point in time. I do begin to wonder if there's a correlation between the committee that oversaw the recommendations of the Patten Commission that possibly provided some level of protection to the PS9 funding, which operated for some 10 years after the Commission report in 1999. Patten, of course, said that the PS9 should have around about 7,500 police officers. That was on the basis that Northern Ireland remained peaceful, that the peace process remained in place. Often what's missed is that assessment also allowed for 2,500 part-time officers in support, which we obviously do not have now at all. And the Patten report gave this number, this calculation, for a period that should provide the organisation with the resourcing and resilience it needed for some 10 years. Since that report and since 2010, when our budget was 903 million, we've seen our budget decrease, but we've seen our demand broaden considerably. When I joined the police, our strapline always was about fighting crime. The officers of the PS&I, the frontline officers, the rank and file, of course, they join the police to keep people safe from crime, but so much of our demand now is about safeguarding and public protection. And we operate significantly in the space that the health service cannot provide provision for, particularly with regards to emergency response to people who are going through crisis, mental health crisis, chaotic episodes, and often obviously through no fault of their own. And I don't criticise the health service because they're equally in an extremely difficult position. The reality of the position is that we have got public services that can't deal with the demand across those public services currently in Northern Ireland. But the health budget advanced to 6.6 billion, which is an 89% increase. As I say, the education budget has increased to 3.4 billion, which is a 23% increase. This is since 2010 because different figures are quoted from different periods of time. All the other policing budgets in the United Kingdom have gone up since 2010. So all of the forces have recruited more police officers and staff. We are an outlier in that our number of police officers and staff have decreased. And we're now at circa 6,300 police officers, which I think on anybody's interpretation, any layperson's interpretation, is extremely concerning. And as the Chief Constable, my professional judgment is that it's unacceptable. With regards to the broader profile of work that we now do, we do around about 500 ambulance calls a month, and we're working with the ambulance service to see how we can address that. And what I'm seeking to achieve here is a collaborative approach to ensure that we can provide a service for these demands that aren't core police responsibilities, but we don't expose other public services either. We have about 42,000 calls a year for concern, if you like, and very recently I was talking to two young police officers. This was the week before last. So the officers attended a call where health had contacted to say they had a significant concern for a lady at an address about her well-being and that she might be going through some mental health crisis. The officers attended. The lady had had a very difficult life, had a history of mental illness, but was safe, was in her own home. There was food in the house. She wasn't going to go out. She wasn't presenting as self-harming. So the officers phoned the doctor, who had done an assessment over the telephone that required us to go there. And the officers asked what was the plan for this lady. And the doctor said, well, you're our plan. Now these officers, that can't be. They're not trained to deal with these issues. I understand the concern for the lady's well-being, but if we'd taken that lady to a hospital because we'd been concerned about her, we'd then probably been waiting at a hospital for a considerable period of time. And that's just an example of the sort of incidents that we're facing more and more. And it obviously means that we are distracted from doing what would more traditionally seen as our core business. So I sit before you today knowing that we're at a time when I think budgets have been broadly announced this afternoon. I don't know how accurate some of the information is that I've been told about before I walked into here. There's indications, and obviously it may be correct, it may be not, that the health budget has now gone to 7.7 billion. That will be an increase of 120% since 2010. And I think there is an increase, if that's correct. There's an increase in the justice budget, but I don't know what of that will come to policing. But the figures being mentioned in the media, and there's a health warning here because this could be incorrect, would suggest that we're not going to get the support that we need again. So we are in a really, really tough place. And what I would say in summary is all other police organisations in Great Britain have not had to endure this and face this. And that, again, let's not forget the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland. The threat level here was at severe for most, or has been at severe for most of the time since 2010. Except for around about 12 months before the murderous attempt against John Caldwell in February last year. And we've just thankfully returned to a substantial threat level again, which is slightly lower. But mainstream police have not faced those sorts of issues in policing in Great Britain. The Garda budget has increased in the last 3 years by 23%. I'll say that again because it sometimes shocks me, 23%. So they're recruiting a significant number of officers because of the broadness of their demand now, which matches ours. So we're being left behind. And I can only do so much with the staff that we have, and the effort and the incredible vocational public service that they have. We have the highest levels of sickness in policing in the United Kingdom, and that is a direct correlation to the level of demand and work that the officers and staff are doing. I'm often challenged at the policing board, and rightfully so, what we're doing about the sickness levels. If we can recruit the right number of officers to deal with our demand, the sickness levels will come down. Much of the sickness is simply tiredness, exhaustion, stress, because of the nature of caseloads that officers are carrying. And only in the last couple of weeks, I'm very sad to report that we had an officer, and the consequence of this for the health of this organisation, the PSNI, worries me significantly. An officer has taken his own life, and I think that some of that is because of the amount of responsibility and workload on people who care so much about their jobs. They don't want to not be able to do the job that they join the organisation to do. And because of the thinnest of blue lines that we now are, in effect, it's having a more and more detrimental effect on the health, actually, of the organisation. So it's not good. And I think we need to collectively, through this committee, through the policing board, I welcome the Justice Minister's support in trying to address this, arrest this decline, and give the PSNI the resources that they need to do the job that needs to be done in Northern Ireland, in the same way that every other policing organisation, including the Guards, is being provided with that sort of funding to do their core function, as well as this broader demand that we're now asked to do. So that's where I'll close my opening remarks with the reality of where we are, and welcome questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Initially, could I confer our condolences to the family of the officer in question, and to the officer's colleagues for what is a very sad circumstance, if what you have outlined is an accurate reflection. I don't think any of us would wish to see that, and we would wish to record our condolences and sympathy for everybody involved in that. Chief, we have your document in front of us. We also have an alarming letter from the Police Federation, and that's the only way I could describe it. You have indicated that you're hitting 70% of your cars available. Neighbourhood has been decimated by abstraction. We've seen the closure of inquiry offices. There is a dearth of detectives and consequently a loss of experience. You've had to revise your operating model. So it's not for me, or it's not for this committee to usurp the space of the policing board, and we're acutely conscious of that. However, we are conscious that you have 65% of the department that we scrutinise as budget. So strategically, I haven't seen the announcement today as to what has happened with regard to budget, but strategically, with what you've already done and now what consequences you may face, what are you planning for? What will your organisation look like? What will be the impact on the public, and what can the public expect from the PSNI?
So firstly, obviously there's the health warning around figures that have been released today, that we don't know the accuracy or not.
Even in terms of, I mean, you were in a bad situation before, so even before this you were planning.
Yeah, so it's just the caveat, the health warning. We need to wait and see what this actually means and if it's accurate. The question about what are we doing? So since I've arrived, we've been doing work to understand exactly where all of our resources are, what all of our resources are doing, and whether that fulfills the core functions that we are aspiring to deliver for the public and the communities of Northern Ireland around keeping them safe and preventing crime. We are now looking at how we optimise the numbers that we have, so the 6,300 officers, in the existing operating model, and making sure that where we can, we take out any bureaucracy and we remove any burdens and remove any activity that doesn't go to the heart of the core functions of the organisation. We're also seeking to plan for recruitment in the organisation at relatively low levels. There are challenges with regards to the recruitment process, although it's a challenge I very much would like and welcome, around how many recruits we can bring in a year because of the capacity of the college. You can't just switch the button on. You have to do certain work to make sure that we can bring in the numbers and in the right place as well. So we're looking at the operating model. This work's been going on now for 3 or 4 months, and the challenge is that in the next 2 or 3 months, for us as an organisation to know that we've leaned everything we can, that all of our resources are in the right place to deal with the demand that we've got. And that, of course, is the ever-broadening demand that we have in the best way that we possibly can. And we're also looking, if we were to get support around a small uplift, and what I asked in my letter the letter that I sent earlier this week went to the chair of the board, it went to the Justice Minister, it went to the Northern Ireland Office, the Secretary of State, the First and Deputy First Minister, it came to this committee, is can we at least go back to the future, as the film sort of title suggests? Can we go back to 2010? Can we go back to our 903 million, which will give us a very small opportunity to do an uplift of around about 150 officers? So we move slightly up from the 6,300 in this calendar year. So that's the ask. Obviously, subject to understanding the information that's going to come out from today and in the next few days and next few weeks, we'll understand whether we're able to go on that journey in this calendar year. Longer term, I'm speaking to a number of stakeholders, and that will include speaking to this committee now that it's sitting, about trying to secure sustained funding for the PSNI, something akin to having a comprehensive spending review, so that we can bake into funding, not just for police actually, this is something that's required for all public services in Northern Ireland, pay awards so we can plan for the organisation. The size of the PSNI and the amount of budget allocated to the PSNI, again I think everybody would accept it's wholly unacceptable to have 1-year budget settlements. So how can we plan for preventative schemes in our communities How can we, look at any of the specialist elements that we need to deal with? Certainly medium-term threats, short, medium-term threats, when we don't know what our budget's going to be in year 2, 3, 4 and 5, looking forward. So we are seeking to get support from across the stakeholder network around having a new conversation. I'm very alive to the fact there's going to be an election later this year, and that might present an opportunity to discuss how the budget in Northern Ireland is allocated. Can we ring fence the money that is intended for policing? I'm currently exploring what within the budget that's provided from Westminster, what is actually expected to go to policing in Northern Ireland and what does go to policing in Northern Ireland. So when that money comes to the devolved assembly, I'm fairly clear that an amount of it doesn't come to the PSNI. So what's the decision-making rationale around that? And is there something we can do? And do it collectively, cohesively with partners to try and ensure that we protect that funding for policing, because we are, in effect, the insurance policy for so many public services. And I always defer to health because of the significant challenges they have. When they can't deal with stuff, by and large, certainly in the community, it's the police that get called. But we're not resourced for it. We're not trained for it. So can we have some conversations, and not necessarily behind closed doors, to understand how we can try to protect the services that we provide, that health provide, moving forward. And the work that I mentioned as I began the answer to this question about how could we incrementally increase our numbers over the next 2, 3, 4 years, how could we then change our operating model to optimise the operating model? Not optimise the resources we've got, but have an optimal operating model. That's the transition that I want to see, working with health. And that will involve very heavily the right care, right person work that we're doing currently. And in answering your question, one of the things, there are so many elements to it, one of the things that we need to do, and you'll be very aware in this committee of the right care, right person approach. It was started in Humberside Police in England. Different forces in GB are now applying it. I know health is in such a difficult place here. I don't think it would be right to take the approach that the Met took. I'm sure there's been a lot of work behind the scenes in London. But the message was, from this date, we're not going to do these calls from the Met Police with regards to mental health issues. That's not something we're going to do. If we can go to the calls, we will go to the calls, but we've only got so many resources. But through the right care, right person planning, we've now got a board in place that's chaired by Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson. We're looking at simple things like, can we have handovers within an hour, as opposed to multiple hours of waiting at a hospital, to be able to give the custody, the responsibility, the safety of a patient over to health. So we're doing a number of things to optimise the model we've currently got, and then to come up with the optimum model, working with our partners across public services, that we can sort of protect the organisation over the next handful of years. And the final thing I'll say about what we're doing, I don't want to be just another whinging chief constable who says they've not got enough money, or another chief executive. I think there is a time now to have a look at the PSNI, to have a health check of the PSNI. So I am going to be having a conversation with stakeholders in the coming weeks and months about what that might look like. So we had Patton in 99. Where are we post 99? What have we done well since the Patton Commission and the introduction of the PSNI? What aren't we doing that we should be doing? How does the funding mechanism work? Is that right? To try again, I suppose, after the inception of the PSNI, to have a body of work to try and future-proof the organisation for the next decade, 2 decades. Because we are very much at a tipping point at the moment, and we can't just carry on like this. We cannot continue in this fashion.
No, and I think certainly we understand that. Chief, I have a few more questions, then I'm going to have a list of people, so I think we probably need to be conscious of time, because I appreciate that you've already given us plenty, and you had to wait a while. Just with regard to what you've just said, one of the questions that had occurred to me for you, and I asked it also of the Justice Minister when she was in front of us prior, what work has been done? You've outlined some elements, and I know that ACC Henderson is working on this, but if you could outline for the committee what work has been done to ascertain the extent to which the PSNI is engaged in work which should be for health practitioners and bodies, because honestly, to hear that the PSNI is taking 500 ambulance calls, and that was, what, a month?
Yes.
That's extraordinary numbers. So could you maybe give us an indication of the work that's ongoing?
So we're doing some work now to get more sophisticated data. What we're not good at in the PSNI is collecting health data where we're doing health work. And I have to say, health don't easily or traditionally collect data about where they're calling for the assistance of police. So we are actually focused now on a 3-month period of trying to extrapolate what that demand looks like in a more sophisticated way, because that helps us present the arguments around what we're doing. So that work is being led by Ryan Henderson. And that will be an emerging picture almost to present our business case and about what we need and what we need to do to change. But I do want to make clear in what we're trying to achieve with the work we're doing to identify this broader demand that we are encountering. There isn't a criticism of health here. This is just a reality of some of the challenges that we're facing in society in Northern Ireland around people who are going through particular crisis. But that more sophisticated look at exactly how much time we're spending, how much time we're kept waiting. Everybody will be very conscious in the committee of the number of times police cars are stuck at absolute emergency. I've encouraged ride-alongs where people such as members of the committee, I'd very much invite members of this committee to go on these ride-alongs, are going out with their officers just to experience it for yourselves about how much distraction there is for officers doing that work. So that work is underway by Ryan, and as we get more information on that, obviously I'll very happily share it with this committee. All right.
Might be useful for us to have Ryan for a presentation at some stage.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chief, my next question was to be around the culture audit, but it would be helpful maybe if you'd give us in writing a status update as to where that's the key issues in that, and status updates, and that'll save us some time. But finally, could I ask you then, I'm conscious that there were decisions around pay reviews and so on, but not in the budgets going forward. Could I ask you for an update on the staff pay and environmental alliance situation, please?
So staff pay, we were asked to submit a remit on the staff pay with an uplift of 5% yesterday. So that remit was ready to go, so we'll provide that to the Department of Justice. Again, I must comment, obviously, that the delays on all of this are unhelpful for all public services, including obviously the police staff in Northern Ireland. The REA allowance, which was first promised as an uplift in 2019, would cost us around about 1.3 million a year to provide to the police staff. Now, that 1.3 million pounds, of course, is a lot of money, but in the scale of budgets, it isn't a huge amount of money. I've made a commitment to do everything I can to provide that uplift, has previously been undertaken, to the staff in the PSNI. Understandably, the Minister, the Department of Justice, wants us to show the affordability. And this is where we have cart and horse. We haven't yet got our budget for this financial year. I'm determined to find that money, but I have to demonstrate in my accounting officer role the affordability for that. Now, as with the police pay awards, which I was very clear and uncompromising with, I'm determined to pay that REA, but I have to find that money. I have to demonstrate that it's affordable for the organisation to pay it. So that's work that I'm now engaged with, and that's why the announcement of budgets is so important to us that we're waiting for.
Thank you very much for that update. I presume you'll keep us appraised. Alex,
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start by saying thank you to the Chief Constable for all the work him and his officers put in, and I want to praise the team down in North Down who are doing an absolutely amazing job, especially Johnson McDowell, the superintendent down there. My questions to you are obviously budget related, and very keen about recruitment of PSNI officers. I'm very worried about the levels of officers you have. I think you're maybe 900 short at the moment. In fact, I read up there that there's actually a case that there should be 8,500 officers. What discussions have you had with the Justice Minister about getting ring fence funding for recruitment specifically? And have you even approached the Treasury yourself to see if you could get more funding, as well as using the Assembly to try and do that for you?
So on the number of officers, if I just deal with that, obviously Patton suggested 7,500. That was with the 2,500 part-time officers. The work we've had done, there are two elements to it. Firstly, there is a calculation that was provided by a consultancy firm who are experts in policing that is used broadly in Great Britain for a police force where there's no exceptional issues. So the Metropolitan Police would have exceptional issues, capital city issues. Greater Manchester Police, very challenging issues, urban environment, national security threats, the same with West Midlands. And of course, PSNI have all of that. So we have a number of unique challenges with regards to policing in Northern Ireland, not least of which is with the only armed police force in Great Britain, which itself brings additional costs. Our buildings have to be fortified still. So there are a lot of challenges for the PSNI. That calculation, though, for the number of officers is 3.88 officers per 100,000 capita population. That's a very rudimentary equation, if you like. That would basically take us to around about 7,400 officers, but that doesn't include the specialist nature of policing in Northern Ireland, the national security responsibilities we've got. That calculation is for a small Shire force. We then brought in a company called Leapwise to do that additional sophisticated work. They're a company that were independently recommended to me by the chairman of the National Police Chiefs Council, and they did some work that I'm happy to provide the committee with, which suggests we need between 8,005 and 8,500 police officers. And the way they did that work, they compared our position and how funding has progressed elsewhere with Police Scotland, policing in England and Wales, and our most similar forces. So we're in a table of most similar forces as well of 5 forces. And that's how they came up with a figure of between 8,005 and 8,500 police officers. They've also done some comparison work with the Garda, or had started to do that as well with regards to that figure. So that's where we get those numbers from. It's based on the independent evaluation about our specific responsibilities in Northern Ireland. With regards to ring-fenced funding, I've had conversations in Westminster with key stakeholders there to try and socialise the concept of that. Of course, what I don't want to do is overreach. I've got a responsibility towards the policing board. Then there's the Department of Justice, and then there's the Department of Finance, and then there's the First and Deputy First Minister, then there's the Northern Ireland Office, then the Secretary of State. There are so many stakeholders that I am trying to lobby carefully to explain the reality of the position for the PSNI. With regards to the Minister, I know the Minister shares my concern about police funding. We've not had any protracted discussions about ring-fenced funding, but that is something that I know we are going to discuss and try to come up with a way that both she and I can achieve the levels of funding that we both know the PSNI require.
Yeah, and just my final question. Obviously, I'm deeply concerned about the closure of all the inquiry desks. Would it be fair to say, if you had the budget, those offices would stay open?
Well, certainly, if I had the budget, this is about money. Then we want to be in our communities. We want to be accessible. We want to be visible. And I think, by the way, this is the tip of the iceberg. It's not going to stop at the numbers that I've announced. There's going to be more, because we're in a direction of travel here. But if we got the funding, I don't want to commit to saying we'd leave them open, because it depends on what funding we got. And I do need more police officers and police staff. But it's certainly something that I would hope to do. Interestingly, when we did some data analysis for a number of those places, so we've done some work to choose them very carefully. There was only something like an 8% demand level of crime, people walking into those front counters. A lot of the other, if you like, foot traffic in there, the sort of requirement for them to be open were our statutory partners, visitors there coming in. They weren't being used anywhere near as much as traditionally those front counters have been used. And there is something we need to do in the organisation where, and I'll just branch off this very quickly, online reporting of crime. Obviously our worlds have changed now, our phones dictate our lives. We received 500,000 calls, 101 calls last year. A lot of that was about reporting incidents and crime into 101. We only got just under 30,000 online reports. We need to make sure that we educate people, we promote, we make easier the online reporting mechanisms, as opposed to calling in to 101 where we have staff tied up listening to those calls and reporting those crimes. The shutting of front counters is again an element of trying to make sure we make best use of our resources, biggest bang for our buck. But if we got the money, obviously I'd certainly look to leave some of those front counters open. But where there's a demand, where people are using them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. Deirdre?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the update so far. And it's just really, again, around the budget. We obviously had the Minister in just before yourself. She set out that it's a difficult budget for all departments, as you know. And, you know, we're hearing through all of the briefings that we've been doing at this committee, just the complexity of cases that, you know, we're now dealing with, that you touched on yourself there. And obviously the need to collaborate more across departments and across the different agencies as well. So it is good. I mean, the Minister herself gave examples of what the police are doing in that regard, and you've just outlined it there as well in terms of health. It is to get a sense. I mean, the budget is not a great budget across the board, and as I say, Naomi has said that herself, but it's just around what engagement you've had with the Minister and with the policing board around these issues. What planned engagement is there going to be over the coming weeks as the outworkings of the budget starts to become, I suppose, more open. And it is also in the conversation, because the Minister said that there will be a collective effort by the Executive through the Finance Minister and come back to the British Government again around the budget settlement overall, the conversation on the basis of need and how we fall below that by the British Government's own admission. So it's just how you see yourself feeding into those discussions in terms of looking at a more sustainable funding arrangement going forward. And also, will your discussions, have they up until now, or will they include the issues around the data breach payments, holiday pay and those other issues as well?
Yeah,
Thank
certainly.
you.
So, having come into this role 6 months ago, what I have established that everything's very much within year, which we spoke about earlier. That's not the way to run public services of this size. So up until very recently, I'm talking a couple of months ago, we had a £61 million gap in financial year that I had no way of addressing. 61 million. Forget the next financial year for a moment. Because of the Assembly coming back, which obviously I was delighted about, we managed to get that gap addressed, and we were able to pay our police officers. They've still not had the money, but they get the money this month, the backdated pay from September, which their colleagues got last year as a pay award, and in an earlier question, we're now able to address the police staff. My entire focus, or primary focus, was closing that gap and getting that money. We're now into a new financial year and we've got a gap of some 130 to 140 million pounds. Because, as was mentioned by the chair, last year's pay award, we haven't got any money for that, or we were, and this is how all public services have been told to plan, to go on the basis of last year's budgets without the uplifts. So we immediately had a gap of around about £50 million. So this almost hand-to-mouth way of dealing with funding is utterly wrong. It's unfair on staff. It's unfair actually on the infrastructure that's supposed to support public services, but overwhelmingly it's unfair on the communities that expect those public services. So moving forward, the Justice Minister and I intend to meet very regularly, face to face. There has been, I know it feels like the Assembly have been back a while now, but it's still not very long, but to have very regular meetings, and with myself and the Northern Ireland Policing Board, to come up with a collective plan. And the Pattern Commission report actually recommended that the Policing Board should be, you know, have a role in making sure that PSNI have sufficient budget to police Northern Ireland. Well, we need to make sure that we are collectively working to do that with the Justice Minister, with the Policing Board and with myself. Since I came into office, because obviously then the Assembly still wasn't sitting, I've had a very close relationship with the board in trying to address last year's gap and plan for the future. We've got a new chair and a new deputy chair. We had one meeting a couple of weeks ago. So we've just got to reset that with regards to what they expect moving forward about how strategically we deal with some of these challenges. And I and the Minister want to align in the rhythm of meetings so that we're all joined up on that, which I very much welcome, which is something, because the Assembly wasn't sitting and because it was an extremely difficult year last year for the PSNI, none of that planned, careful, methodical thinking about the future and how we can do everything we can to get the funding, presenting a unified position, that simply hadn't been happening. So that is something that we've agreed that we need to do moving forward. And I have, to go to your question around, and it links in with the previous question, I have been doing as much as I can speaking to people in Westminster, because it feels to me there was an ignorance, that there was a lack of awareness about some of the challenges here, particularly around policing. And that's why, and I mentioned it to the chair earlier, I think we do need to do something about looking at the PSNI where we are today. I think it's the most remarkable organisation. I've been in policing 40 years. I have to tell you, it's the best policing I've seen. And I've tried to work out why that is. I think some of it, partly, is there's more of a vocational nature of policing in Northern Ireland, because to join the police here, because of the history here, and what happened to John Caldwell last year is a stark reminder, you make a life choice to join the police here. It's not because you've seen a TV programme you think, oh, that's exciting, I'm going to join the police, or a relative says, oh, why don't you try the police? There are consequences for you about your security, for your family, and particularly for families who come from the nationalist community. And obviously for them to make that decision, there's even more of a life choice. And I just think overall that means that they're more vocational. I think they care. They've thought more about doing this. So that's why we need to support them. We need to resource them properly. We need to pay them their pay awards on time. And we need to make sure that the entire infrastructure of the organisation is fit for purpose, which, because of the decline in funding, currently we're not. We're relying on amazing staff, and we can't keep relying on them because they're breaking.
So as part of, I suppose, the engagement the Minister will be having with the rest of the executive by way of making a case to Westminster, you're feeding into that process, or you will be over the coming weeks then, around that gap in funding that we have at the moment.
I am very happy from a policing perspective to show the unique challenges of the PSNI, where even my colleagues in Great Britain would say the PSNI is an outlier. The PSNI is an organisation in policing that has to be funded properly and has suffered in a way that other police forces and mainstream policing in GB has not suffered in recent years. And that's recognised by the National Police Chiefs Council. I think, I was with Drew Harris yesterday. It's recognised by Drew Harris, who has a particular, obviously, emotional tie to the police service of Northern Ireland and policing in Northern Ireland. And I think they're all looking with concern about how we've been left to almost wither on the vine. And I know it's hard for public services, but they have had increases and we haven't. And yet we're picking up a lot of the demand that they can't deal with. It's not rocket science. We need some help. We really do.
It's not for me to speak for the Chief Constable or for the PSNI, but I think it's important for members to understand also that the PSNI is different from other police forces across the rest of the UK and presumably the Republic, in that you're not allowed to have a deficit, nor are you allowed to borrow money, nor are you allowed to hold reserves, which puts you in a unique position and in a very difficult one too. And I think it's just important that, for completeness of understanding of the position that you're in, that members are aware of that and it's recorded. Deirdre, are you finished? Yes.
Thank you.
Sinead, and then Ciara, and then Justin.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Listen, the points around the budget have been well made by other members, so I wanted to just raise an entirely different point. And my point is in relation to some of the disused barracks. Now, and I appreciate that the Chief Constable may not have this information to hand today. And I also want to caveat by saying that I have been regularly engaging with the policing board on this matter. But my question is around the disused PSNI barracks. So you will be aware, Chief Constable, that there were a number of them that were sort of held behind and not put through the D1 process due to post-Brexit uncertainties, I think was the reason. Now, one of those barracks is particular to my own constituency. It's located in Warren Point. And it has been vacant and disused and a general eyesore now for a number of years. And I wouldn't be overstating it when I say it's a blight on the town. So now I appreciate that it has recently gone through the D1 process. A housing association has, expressed an interest in it, and I think that process had started that process of engagement with the housing association, because obviously we have a severe housing shortage and a housing crisis right across the north, but particularly in South Down. So it was welcome news whenever the housing executive and subsequently the housing association had come in to express an interest in this. But I'm led to believe that quite recently that process actually collapsed, and the housing association has since withdrawn their interest in it. So, and I appreciate you mightn't have the information specific to this at hand today, but I was curious as to the reasons behind that. Is it because of costs? Is it a cost implication? And if so, obviously we'd be keen to work through that and see those, those difficulties overcome. But I wonder if the Chief Constable could furnish me particularly with the information regarding specifically Warren Point, the disused barracks, and give a commitment to proactively work to resolve any issues with the housing executive or any subsequent housing association that expresses an interest to ensure that that site is returned for community use, and particularly to fill the very real housing stress and housing need there is within the South Down area.
So I can't answer you as I sit here today. I did get something of a briefing on this a couple of weeks ago, but if you'd allow me, I'll do a written response to you to give you the accurate and up-to-date position on that. But just to reassure you around estates, on Monday we had a senior team planning day, and we had a presentation from some work that was commissioned to look at every part of our estate. And obviously what we need to understand is, with our operating model, are we optimising all of that estate? Do we need all of that estate? Some of our buildings are extremely expensive to maintain. So that strategic work has looked at a medium to long-term plan which would overlay with our operating model. So for instance, the discussion, do we just have one control centre as opposed to 3. All of that work, which is necessary to future-proof the organisation, is now being done. And in fact, the presentation on Monday was extremely forensic around the detail about the estate and the costs and the future costs of the estate. I will specifically answer the question you ask about Warren Point in writing, but just a reassurance that we are very aware of our estate costs and our fleet costs as well, because we have a extremely old fleet, because we've not been able to afford to purchase new vehicles in the way that other police forces have. So we've been maintaining vehicles, and more are not usable. So that's another factor that's often missed beyond the workforce, is the other requirements of running a business of this size and the finances that are needed to run that business efficiently, and particularly around efficiency of buildings. But I'll do a written response.
So Sinead, part of that.
Appreciate that, Chief Constable. Thank you.
Sinead, part of that also, you might need to speak to the Housing Association as to why they decided to pull out. It's probably not for the police to be able to answer that one, but I'm sure you've got local contacts there and you could find out. Sinead, do you have anything else?
No, that's fine. And just to say to her, we have been engaging with the Housing Association, but the details around the reasons are scarce. That's why I was taking the opportunity just to raise it with the Chief Constable today. But I appreciate that he's going to respond to me in writing, so thank you.
We understand. Thank you. Ciara?
I just thank you, John, for coming on here today. And I suppose from what you provide us in writing, I suppose one thing that pops out for me is that grave concern, and obviously it is very much dependent on the budget, but is that frontline safeguarding role that your officers do on the ground. And I actually liked what you had mentioned regarding the right care by the right worker. Yeah. Have you any thoughts? And I have had experience working through family support hubs and neighbourhoods and communities where you have had to be the first point of contact. Yeah. And that's even when we're taking somebody by the hand to our local GP and health centre, where you still have to intervene. And as you say, that time and resources, and it's quite critical work. We have care in the community, and we see more of that. And so it's not reducing, it's increasing, where we have vulnerable people living in neighbourhoods and communities. And so from what you're aware and knowledge in other areas, who is the right person at that moment in time, and is there any innovative work being done that you have looked into? Yeah, so how you could bring a collective together, a collaborative approach, and supporting those vulnerable people and doing that safeguarding?
So only yesterday I saw a project which was in Dublin, or island-based, whereby a private organisation provide a service of conveying people to for mental health assessments. But that's a collaboration that they choreograph it, where you've got health professionals in a vehicle which manages that period of an assessment and the care of the individual, as opposed to the police doing it. In England and Wales, and we've looked at doing this here, and we've done some aspects of this in our control rooms, you have these multi-agency capabilities, and we had one where I previously worked, but they rely on ongoing collaboration and funding from different organisations. We would have a paramedic, a health professional, normally a psychiatric nurse, and a police officer in a bespoke vehicle where they all had access to the relevant information, data sets for their specific organisation. So you'd have access to health records, you'd have access to all the police records at a given address, which helps inform those going to that response in a far better way to deal with the individual going through a crisis. Also, and it's a point here, often when our police officers turn up to deal with these issues, you have two police officers turn up, we're an armed organisation, the very optics of dealing with people who are going through an extremely difficult time in their lives isn't helped by that visible response. By having a specialist response with a softer, visible sort of outlook, it often sets the tone far better to deal with people that are going through, episodes that it needs expertise to deal with. And often what our officers are just a holding position, until that expertise is available. But often that expertise, and I was with a lady today, a nurse, who's a relative of one of my officers who unfortunately passed away. And she was talking about sometimes they have to wait days and days for beds, but they can't send people home because it's not safe for them to go home. So they're actually better waiting for a bed at the hospital. Now, all of those challenges that people are facing, if that person's got mental health challenges, we're sitting there with them. And I've been given examples. Some of the staff have been sitting with people for well over a day. Our shifts have to pass on the responsibility. So that's not the right person. It's not the right care. These multi-agency responses, and often they are so much more cost effective. I mean, they are so much more efficient with regards to how they can deal with those issues as well. That's the sort of stuff that we are looking at. And the people that I spoke to yesterday in Dublin are going to come with the vehicle that they've got, a bespoke vehicle that's kitted out with all sorts of medical provisions to deal with those situations. There's no restraints in there. It's a very soft approach to try and de-escalate any position. They're going to come up to Belfast and show us, do a bit of a show and tell to see if we can get a similar sort of capability up here. So all that sort of stuff we're looking to do. And Ryan, ACC Henderson, is working with Health to explore any good ideas like that to try and reduce our demand but provide the right care, right person approach to these calls for help that we're currently dealing with when we shouldn't be.
Well, that's good. And obviously the likes of the complex lives at Belfast, there's probably multi-agency reference points that you could go to as well in relation to how that could be expanded and developed upon, or your multi-health teams within our GPs now and stuff. So there's where you can connect, but I think it's critically important because I'm conscious from my own experience, these individuals that you are supporting and safeguarding and bringing to a hospital and sitting waiting, they're repeat.
Yeah.
We have individuals until, unfortunately, many of them then have passed away, but they are in neighbourhoods and communities for years, and they're just in and out of a system.
Humberside Police, in the work they did, in the evaluation post the introduction of right care, right person, said their demand was reduced by just under 10%. Now, I don't know what that would look like here, but that's quite a significant reduction in demand just by introducing a different approach to dealing with that caseload, just under 10%, which would help us significantly.
Thank you. Justin?
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, how are you? I wish you a hearty more ort to you in your new role. Good luck to you in your position. Baptism of fire, I'm sure it's been, but no better man. South of my policing review, and further to Sinead's question from earlier, part of that review was the recommendation that Crossglen Police Station be closed and Newtown Hamilton Police Station be upgraded to be a police station befitting of the 21st century, which both of them are not. Crossglen's obviously highly militarised as is Newtown and are not reflective of the time, and possibly perpetuate the uneasy relationship between nationalism and the police service, and there's symbols of the past which should be gone. Where does that stand? I'd appreciate your feedback in terms of where those both stand and timelines wise, and when can Crossglen become available to the Crossglen Rangers and the community of Crossglen, which could be a positive beacon of hope for the future as opposed to what it currently is. Have you any perspective on that, please, Constable?
Well, I can't give you details now, but I'll give you a written answer around that. But what I will say is I endorse entirely what you've said with regards to the nature of Crossmaglen Police Station, what it looks like, the fortification. We want to move away from that type of estate. That's one of the conversations we had on Monday with the estate strategy team. That's very much part of our thinking around resetting the PS9 moving forward. There is so much that we want to do, that we are planning to do, and listen, money doesn't solve every problem. A lot of this is about culture and attitudes with regards to policing and policing being successful policing. But we do need to be properly funded to be able to do some of the, and it's not just in Crossmaglen, but some of the work we want to do with our estates as well. But I'll respond to you in detail around timings and where we are with that.
20,000 deprivation of liberty authorisations over the last 4 years. That must create a huge challenging burden on your officers. Legacy Investigation Bureau working overtime 5 days to the cliff edge. People waiting with bated breath, trying to get convictions over the line before that cliff edge. Perpetrators waiting with bated breath, knowing that once that deadline passes by, they're in the clear, scot-free for their evil deeds of the past. What's your perspective on that? And will that resource that's currently in LAB working day and night trying to bring convictions, will that resource be reallocated, and will that create less of a burden on your officers?
So there will, in the medium term, there will be a transition away from, or a reduction in resources in the Legacy Investigation Branch. We also have a Legacy Inquest Unit that has significant resources that's been working tirelessly to deal with this collapsing time frame of all of these different legacy cases, researching, obtaining the information relevant to those cases and providing it to the coroner. As you're very aware of, we're a few days now until the 1st of May, when any ongoing investigation into legacy for the period up to the Good Friday Agreement will cease. Any decisions that are made around a prosecution will continue in the normal way, but if there hasn't been a prosecution decision made, then those matters stop, and in simple terms, everything gets handed to the Commission. There's an element that I should mention about legacy, and I can't go into specific cases because there's various legal challenges going on, but just to reassure this committee, when I arrived, I was very conscious in October that we had around about 6-7 months left before the dates would be for the end of legacy inquests. I commissioned an end-to-end review by an independent barrister to look at how we were dealing within our own process mapping the PSNI of providing legacy inquests with the information that PSNI hold. How could we effectively maximise the prospect of finishing as many inquests as we possibly could before the 1st of May for these families, because they have been let down so often and made false promises. And there are 3 categories of those legacy cases that are about to all conclude anyway. Firstly, the category, as I looked at it in October, was those that could finish. And we needed to make sure that we did everything we could to ensure that they finished. There was a second category that, because even with 6 months to go, there was clearly so much to do, it was unlikely that those cases would actually finish. They'd run out of time. And then there's a third category of cases that have been reported about in the media recently, where because of public interest immunity, sensitive information, the legacy process doesn't have a legal framework such as you have in civil cases, known as a CMP process, a closed material proceedings process, to manage sensitive information. You don't have that at an inquest. It's often referred to as the Litvinenko scenario. Mr. Litvinenko, when he died, obviously everybody's very aware of who he was and what happened. An inquest was opened, and then the coroner became clear that the coroner would not be able to fulfil his responsibilities about establishing how, where, who was responsible for Mr. Litvinenko's death because of the amount of sensitive material, because of the relationship with Mr. Litvinenko and the British intelligence services, and because of the involvement of the Russian state. So he had to collapse the inquest, and he recommended a public inquiry. The family applied for a public inquiry. That was declined, but the family appealed that, and then a public inquiry did take place. And we've got a number of those cases where PII is causing those cases not to finish because there isn't a mechanism to deal with the PII. And the reason I describe that is that, you know, we've tried to be very clear that we've done everything we can to deal with these cases with full transparency for the families. And I have to be careful what I say, but there are ongoing judgments now around what we've tried to do to demonstrate that transparency, okay, and the provision of information for those families. What I will say is for all of those cases where inquests have not been able to finish, and I know this particular period of time would be very difficult for those families. Imagine if it was our families. We will give the ICRIR, the Commission, all of the information, absolute unfettered access, unredacted material to the Commission. So if those families go to the Commission, Sir Declan Morgan and the Commission can work with those families to provide the information through the Commission moving forward. That's a very clear undertaking that I've given to those families, because I know how frustrated a number of them have been because the inquest timeline is about to come to a conclusion. The LIB will still deal with a number of cases that aren't Troubles related during the period of the Troubles. There are some of those. And they will also, of course, deal with a number of cases that post-date April 1998 that are outside of the remit of the Commission. So we'll continue to deal with those. And there are also a number of inquests that post-date Troubles-related cases, post-date April 1998. And again, we will continue to deal with those cases. One of the early questions, though, and it links to legacy, that I probably didn't actually deal with this element. I was asked about cost implications for the PSNI moving forward, trying to sort out strategically the PSNI for the future and make sure the organisation is structured in a way that we can deal with funding challenges. There is a challenge around the data breach and the costs of that. There is a challenge around the holiday pay and the costs of that. And there is a challenge around the civil cases for Troubles-related matters and the challenge of that. And what I'm saying around each of those three categories, we are not funded to police Northern Ireland properly with the budget we've got today. Those issues are going to cost significant amounts of money to deal with, and we have not got any budget to deal with those. So that's a separate conversation again with the Minister, with the Policing Board, and with the First and Deputy First Minister, indeed with Westminster, to try to secure funding to actually deal with those issues so we can address them and we can move on from them. Because there are a significant number of civil cases that the legal costs are going up and up and up, and a number of those cases should be settled. But we don't have a budget to settle those cases.
Given your budget constraints and the challenges you have mentioned, how soon will the police force be reflective of the communities it serves?
So that is an impossible, I think, question to properly answer. I wish I could answer it. Obviously, I'm extremely keen to get recruitment, advertisement for recruitment underway again. Just to be clear for the committee, we have started recruitment again, and the recruits that are now at Garnerville were previously selected under a selection and recruitment process from last year. So we have a number of people who are already selected, vetted, and ready to come into the organisation. In the autumn, if we were to get the money that, and it's not a lot of money, it's a small amount of money that we need, we would go back out to advert to recruit. And that's when, and we're already doing a lot of work with the Catholic Police Association. I'm doing a lot of work with elements of the nationalist community to try and help us do everything we possibly can to attract recruits to the nationalist community. Rome wasn't built in a day, but I want to see us, and we've had great success with recruitment from diverse communities in England and Wales, where we've changed the face literally of policing. In my old force, we had a diverse police representation of police officers at 4%. We took that to 12% really quickly. So it can be done, and that doesn't necessarily need any sort of statutory requirement around 50-50 recruitment. This is about trust and confidence, where people feel it's safe to join an organisation and they want to join the organisation. And the only thing I'll finish on that, I met a young female officer last week who has an incredibly personal story about why she joined the PSI from nationalist community. What I can't do is put her out there as almost a poster girl for the PSNI because of her community background and her story. But I wish I could, because it would make everybody want to join the PSNI from the nationalist community. So I'm looking at ways of trying to overcome some of those challenges so that we can make a very clear statement to people from the nationalist community that the PSNI is welcoming, is safe, and we need to be representative of all the communities we're policing. So there will be, and we've started some of the work, a real drive around that representative element of getting the organisation to reflect all the communities we serve, including the emerging Eastern European communities as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin. Stuart? Stuart, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Just returning to the issue of the budget. From what we can see from the press today, the budget is going to be an exceptionally challenging situation. The Chief Constable, you're right, obviously, to make your very strong claim for the budget entitlement that PSNI require to deliver all of your programmes and, of course, to keep our communities safe. But do you also recognise that if you get into a situation of where organisations within the justice system start to compete with one another for the budget, that you end up robbing Peter to pay Paul, and that you're all moving parts of a very important system that delivers justice? So with police comes prisons, comes courts, comes probation service, comes our legal system. You're part of a whole integrated important movement, and if the total budget has failed that, then the partners need to work together to make their claims and case rather than pull apart.
No, I'd actually go further than that. I'd say all of the public services, it's an integrated framework. So if you look at the prisons and the challenges of mental health faced in the prisons, and I've been in the prisons very recently, looking at the issues that they face, we need a whole systems approach, and there needs to be a cohesive position, and it was mentioned around lobbying Westminster together around the arguments and show the rationale and the evidence of why we need more public funding here. And I know this committee will be alive to the work that they've done in the devolved space in Wales to show how much is required for the Welsh devolved budget to provide the public services in Wales that have equitable sort of response to those in England. And that's the sort of work that we need to do here. But I'm the Chief Constable of the PSNI, and what I see every day is a workforce that is absolutely exhausted and increasingly is not going to be able to cope with what we're facing. I have great relationships with the prison service here and the PPSNI. I was talking to Stephen Heron only last week. Steve and I are going to have a meeting in the next couple of weeks around how we might speed up justice, improve file quality. We're already doing the sort of submission. Well, we're doing the pilot scheme with regards to no prosecution files to try and take a lot of the bureaucracy out for the PPS more than the police, which frees them up to spend more time on cases that they should spend time on. So just to reassure you, Stuart, we are doing a lot in the shared space. But I am particularly concerned about the policing budget because of the broader nature of what we have to do. But I do agree that it needs to be an integrated approach across all public services, not just with regards to the justice sector. Because certainly in the field of policing, we overlap a number of sectors. And what I don't want to do is in any way disadvantage anybody else. The simple message I've had, and I've given to the policing board, if we could just get the budget that we should get from the budget that Westminster provide, I think the PSNI would have been okay. So if we go from that starting point, I think we'll be in a much healthier position from a policing perspective than we currently are. But I understand your point, and I'm certainly not trying to disadvantage anybody else, and we do all need to work collectively together. And I think we are doing that.
Okay, Stuart?
Thank you, Chief Constable. That's been very helpful, and indeed reassuring for us. And I think from a political perspective, just to say that in terms of lobbying Westminster, I don't think you're going to find any disagreement in the Assembly in terms of seeking and making the proper argument, as you say, like Wales, that additional funding right across the board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Constable, in your answers to Justin, you had made mention of the use of PIIs, and you had indicated that there was a degree of frustration amongst families who have not seen their inquests come to fruition or completion. Yeah. I think it's important to note that actually that extends to some families who have had their inquests come to fruition. I know that I was recently with the Kingsmill survivor and families, and they have expressed frustration at the use of, I think, 8 or 9 PIIs in the course of that inquest that has taken 8 years to resolve. So it's not just an issue around those who've had. Yes, Deirdre?
It was just on that point, because it was just to give a rounded view. And it's not all for yourself to answer, but there is a concern with PIIs, and rightly so. And I suppose the danger is it has tainted policing to some extent in terms of being involved in legacy as a broader issue that we knew. And obviously the ICRIR that you mentioned doesn't have the support. I mean, the new mechanisms that are being brought in over the heads and against the wishes of parties and families and human rights organisations here. Compared to maybe mechanisms that could have been agreed and were previously agreed through Stormont House. So I just think it was important to kind of make that point.
So, Constable, could I thank you? You've been generous, extremely generous with your time. In your letter to us, you make a number of asks. Some of those are not in our gift, as you'll appreciate. However, one of those asks is within our gift, and that is that the contribution of policing to society and public services is both recognised and prioritised. And I think everybody in this committee would wish to recognise the contribution of policing to society in the broadest terms, because now policing is much more than dealing with crime. Whether that should be the case is questionable, but nevertheless I think we would wish to record our gratitude to your officers who are immensely under pressure and who are doing their very best in difficult circumstances. So we do wish to recognise that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you. We look forward to seeing you again, and thank you for your generosity with your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're just at the end of that then. It may be worthwhile. You'll see in your pack that we have a shocking letter from the Police Federation, and it may be worthwhile on the back of the evidence that we've heard today, and perhaps allowing for some time for work to be done on the budgets, to hear from the Police Federation and indeed ACC Henderson on the measures kind of that they're looking at. Now, I think we can consider the best means to do that, whether it's in a formal evidence session or whether there's maybe a different means. Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Or whether there's a different means to do that. But I think it would be helpful for the committee's information to hear from both of those people with regard to the work they're undertaking. Are members content with that?
Yeah, grand, but just there may be others throughout the course of the budget, that you're not seeing the Elevate one section across the other. No issue at all in terms of the letter and stuff, but just there may be others then as we move through the kind of budget process.
I think likely there will. The issue with ACC Henderson is because he's doing particular work around the health aspect and the collaboration with health and trying to take things forward that way. Plus there's a lot of work with the other partners under speeding up justice, which could be helpful for us. So we'll look at that. I think it would have been ideal to have some more insight into that in advance of our strategic planning, but I think still getting the information will prove useful. If we could move then to agenda item 6, which is adult restorative justice, and we have a written paper which is at pages 100 to 105 of your meeting pack. So the Department has provided the Committee with an update on the progress made to deliver the adult restorative justice strategy and wider restorative justice developments. There have been a number of developments since the strategy was published in March 2022. These include the publication of the annual report, the publication of a revised protocol, the appointment of an interim protocol lead, the designing of a new accreditation process, the promotion of understanding of restorative justice across Northern Ireland, and the monitoring and reporting of the number and outcome of referrals. Are members content to note the information, or does anybody have any further information they would like or clarification they require at this stage? Content to note? Yes, thank you. Agenda item 7 is a draft SR. It's the Lay Magistrates Eligibility Order, Northern Ireland 2024. So that's at pages 106 to 122 of your meeting pack. The rule makes provision to set the eligibility criteria for the reappointment of lay magistrates until the age of 75 after they were previously required to retire at the age of 70. The rule will be subject to the draft affirmative procedure and will come into operation following consideration and approval by the Assembly. Members, the committee was content with the proposal for the rule at its meeting of the 21st of March 2024, and the Department has confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy content since the proposal was considered by the committee. The examiner of statutory rules has raised no concerns regarding the technical aspects of the rule either. Are members content with the rule? Are we court to make decisions on things? Yes. Yes, we are. Lovely, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. All right. Given that members are content, I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice consider draft SR, the Lay Magistrates Eligibility Order, Northern Ireland 2024, and recommends that it be approved by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Great.
I will outline the views of the committee on this statutory rule in the debate, which is scheduled for Monday, the 29th. All right. Agenda item 8 is draft SR period products Department of Justice specified public service bodies regulations Northern Ireland 2024. Details are at pages 123 to 145 of the meeting pack and pages 19 to 22 of the tabled pack. The rule specifies the public service bodies within the Department of Justice's remit that will be subject to the duties under the Period Products Free Provision Act Northern Ireland 2022. The specified bodies will be required to establish and maintain arrangements to ensure that period products are obtainable in their premises free of charge for women and girls who need to use them. The rule will be subject to the draft affirmative procedure and will come into operation following consideration and approval by the Assembly. The committee agreed that it was content with the proposal for the rule at its meeting on the 11th of April 2024, and the committee wrote to the department to seek clarification on whether period products would be available throughout Northern Ireland courts and tribunals, and generally the public-facing aspects of the justice estate that came under the department's remit. A response to that is at pages 19 to 22 of your tabled pack, and it's an encouraging response, so I'm glad that we asked the question. The examiner of statutory rules has raised no concerns regarding the technical aspects of the statutory rule. Are members content with the rule?
Content.
On that basis, I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered the draft SR, the period products Department of Justice specified public services bodies regulations Northern Ireland 2024 and recommends that it be approved by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And again, I will outline the views of the committee in the debate on the statutory rule, which is scheduled for Monday. Agenda item 9 is a further statutory rule. It's SR 2024/72, the Coronavirus Act 2020, extension of provisions relating to live links for courts and tribunals order, Northern Ireland 2024. Pages 146 to 161 of your pack refer. And we've discussed this at length previously. The rule will extend the provisions in the Coronavirus Act 2020 that allow courts and statutory tribunals to receive evidence wholly or in part through the use of audio or video links for a further 6 months beyond 24th of March 2024. And we knew this was going to come and would be necessary. We noted that the Coronavirus Act powers 2020 powers have been used to extend these provisions on a number of occasions. We also understand that there's going to be a number to come, and we had agreed to ask the Department for its view on whether the continuous use of the powers was proportionate and appropriate. Information on the Department's plans to make permanent provision for the use of audio and video links was also requested. The Department responded stating that the Minister is satisfied that there remains a clear role for the continued use of the provisions to tackle the backlog of cases that accrued during and since the pandemic, and it may take until 2028 to clear without extra resources. The Department has also advised of the Minister's intention to include provisions to cater for the wider use of live links as part of the Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service Digital Modernisation Programme within the Department's first bill, which it plans to introduce before the summer recess, as we've heard. The reliance on powers in the 2020 Act is therefore expected to be an interim arrangement, and I think we can all welcome that. So based on all of that information, the committee agreed to recommend that the previous rule be approved by the Assembly. However, the committee was subsequently advised that the department plans to bring such provisions by way of amendment at consideration stage. And as we've already heard, the course of that discussions in this matter are ongoing, and hopefully we'll have a further informal conversation at the end of the meeting to determine our way forward through that. So, members, I would remind you that the Examiner of Statutory Rules has raised no concerns regarding the technical aspects of the rule. Do members have any other comments, or are you content with the rule? Are members content?
Content.
Yes. Okay. On that basis, I note there is an element of reluctance, but we are where we are, and at least we've raised our concerns and they're going to be addressed in the course of the bill. So I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2024-72, the Coronavirus Act 2020, extensions of provisions relating to live links for courts and tribunals, Order Northern Ireland 2024, and recommends it be approved by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
And again, I will reflect the Committee's views in the debate on the rule, which is yet to be scheduled. Agenda item 10 is SR 2024-81, the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, Application of Police and Criminal Evidence, Northern Ireland Order 1989, Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2024. These are really short titles. I would refer members to pages 162 to 173 of your pack for the relevant papers. This rule will make amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, and I've read out the title previously. New powers relating to the forfeiture of crypto assets were inserted in the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, by the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023. This order will amend the 2016 order to include new investigatory powers with relevant safeguards in support of those forfeiture powers. The Examiner of Statutory Rule has raised no concerns regarding the technical aspects of the rule. Are members content with the rule?
Content.
Thank you. So, on that basis, I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2024-81, the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, Application of Police and Criminal Evidence, Northern Ireland Order 1989, Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, I'm going to refer you to pages 171 to 173 of your meeting pack, which contains the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. Is this the same thing again? It's linked. Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure we weren't duplicating.
It's the commencement order. So.
Yeah, this is the commencement order. Sorry, apologies. I'm just trying to get my head in gear. It's been a long day. This order brings into force Part 3 of Schedule 8 to the 2023 Act and Section 179 of the same Act, insofar as it relates to Part 3 of Schedule 8. These provisions bring the powers regarding the forfeiture of crypto assets into force. The date of coming into operation is the 26th of April 2024. There's no statutory requirement for this statutory instrument to be laid in the Assembly, so this is for information only. Members are asked to note the commencement order. Noted? Thank you. Agenda item 11 is SL1, the Damages Process for Setting Rate of Return Regulations, Northern Ireland 2024, and we're now at pages 174 to 232 of your meeting pack for the relevant papers. The Department of Justice proposes to make a statutory rule under the Damages Act 1996. The Damages Return on Investment Act, Northern Ireland 2022, amended the Damages Act 1996 to reform the way that the personal injury discount rate in Northern Ireland is set. This rule will make changes to the statutory methodology by which the government actuary has to set the personal injury discount rate for Northern Ireland. The changes to be made will prescribe annual weekly earnings instead of the retail prices index as the measure to be used in allowing for the impact of infiltration, and will modify the standard adjustment for the impact of taxation and the cost of investment advice and management from 0.75% to 1.25%. The statutory rule will be subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedure. So I'm going to seek your views now, members, on whether you're content with the proposed statutory rule or if you have any further information or clarification that you would like. I suppose from my part, they've laid out quite comprehensively what the issues are. What I'm not clear about is the implications. So certainly I think I would like some more information around the implications. Does anybody else have anything?
I would like Sesame Street simple explanation as to what this means. Why it will impact our costs and price of insurance, insurance premiums, which are already more expensive here than on any other part of these islands. We can't just wave something through here which is going to hike up our insurance costs even further. So a Sesame Street simple explanation as to what the discount rate actually means for our insurance premiums going forward, and how the setting of that is. How is it justifiable that the discount rate is so different here than it is in Scotland or in England or in Wales?
All right, Justin, we'll get that. Deirdre?
Agreed, more clarity needed on the impact, yeah.
Would an oral briefing be beneficial? Do members want an oral briefing so that we can...
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to
Yeah,
get them
that's
here.
fair.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 12 is SL, the Judicial Pensions, Remedial Service, etc. Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2024, and these are at pages 233 to 248 of your meeting pack.
Sorry, Chair, can I just flip back a bit as well?
Yes.
In terms of the discount rate, the Equality Impact Assessment has been said that it complies. I don't know if it does comply. Does it not really impact people from disadvantaged backgrounds in terms of cost of insurance? If they're precluded because of those prices, does it satisfy Section 75?
Usually the insurance is kind of the defendant, doesn't it? But I mean, we can look at that and we'll ask Justin, we'll find out.
Sorry, for...
And usually the defendants in those circumstances are businesses and companies, but again, there could be implications. So yes, we'll raise that, Justin, and find out what the position is. Thank you. Right, I'm not going to revise what I've already read out in terms of the pensions issue here, so let's see where we are. Yes, so by way of explanation then to this Judicial Pensions SL, the Department proposes to make a statutory rule under the Public Service Pensions Act Northern Ireland 2014 and the Public Service Pensions and Judicial Offices Act 2022, known as the 2022 Act. The Judicial Pensions, Remediable Service, etc. Regulations Northern Ireland 2023, which are the 2023 regulations, made provision for the MacLeod remedy to be applied to a number of groups of judges who were not covered under the 2022 Act. The rule will make technical amendments to the 2023 regulations to ensure the deliverability of the original policy intent for immediate detriment members, including litigants and gap judges. The statutory rule will be subject to the negative resolution procedure. Are members content with the statutory rule, or do you require any further information or clarification? Content? Yep. Yes? Thank you. Agenda item 13 is the Forward Work Programme. An updated Forward Work Programme and a draft Department of Justice Forward Work Programme are at pages 250 to 260 of your meeting pack. The committee strategic planning session is going to take place next Thursday, which is the 2nd of May at 1:30, and that session is going to be in the Stormont Hotel. We've switched things around slightly because we would have found ourselves in a position of receiving 4 oral evidence sessions, which I think would be too much, and we need to balance our work a bit better. So we're looking at that. And again, I suppose I would wish members to note that the Vice Chair and I would like to take a look at the Forward Work Programme to make sure that we're evenly balanced. We've set aside time for things that we need and allow some flexibility for issues that arise. So we'll have a look at that and report back. So members are asked to note the documents unless they wish to raise any issues. Does anybody have any issues? No. So could I please ask you to note in your diary that next week's meeting then is going to be at 1:30 in the Stormont Hotel. Agenda item 14 is correspondence. There's a correspondence memo and 16 items of correspondence covering pages 263 to 467 of your meeting pack. Let me just get this up on my screen because I think I had a couple of things that I wanted to check. That's 263. All right. I'm going to draw your attention to 3 of the items, and then we'll all have an opportunity to comment on any other items of correspondence which may have a particular interest. So I'm going to refer you to item 9, which is the report by the Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland on the effectiveness of Part 1 of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021, and that's at pages 298 to 413 of the pack. I'm seeking your agreement, members, to write to the Department, the PSNI and the PPS to request their responses to the recommendations appropriate to their respective organisations. Are members agreed?
Yep.
Thank you. Now I'll refer you to item 15, which is the press release from the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, which is at pages 449 and 50 of your meeting pack. This urges the Minister of Justice to provide the same legal protection for retail workers in Northern Ireland as that in the legislation recently announced at Westminster. We're seeking agreement to forward the correspondence to the Department of Justice and ask for a response to the issues raised. Are members content?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm also going to refer members to correspondence from Retail NI at item 16, which includes the report Working Together, Retail NI's Plan to Tackle Retail Crime, and a request to present the report to the committee, and that's at pages 451 to 467. Members, do you wish to consider taking oral evidence, or do you want to hold an informal meeting at a future date around this issue, or how do you wish to proceed? Any thoughts?
I don't know, could we hold that for our planning session to kind of look at our work programme and see what
we can move it to there.
Think?
That's fine. And I think we should make use of informal options where they're available to us.
Whoever's available, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I had a couple of issues under correspondence just that I want to check. Yeah, just going back to the damages issue, could we clarify as part of that too how often the damages situation is reviewed? There's an issue about 7% increase of daily fees paid to the devolved tribunals, judiciary and lay magistrates and to salaried members of the Lands Tribunal, and that's an increase of 7%, which seems quite high. Could we ask how they reach that percentage, please? Yes, also within around page 271 we have correspondence around remand. And a question that I would like to know, I mean, we note there that there's some people are on remand for 150 days, and some extend to 6 people are over 1,500 days at this stage. I would like to know what work has been done to establish whether some of these period of remand exceed, it may be just an issue of my understanding, but to establish whether some of these periods of remand actually exceed a sentence that would be allocated if, at court. And it says there 42% of remand committals did not result in a custodial sentence. So it's to try and to understand what the picture is there about the periods of remand, how time served factors in, and whether or not there is anybody in excess of what their sentence would exceed. And then there's correspondence from the department. I'm not sure if I think it's in correspondence about our visit to prison. That's in correspondence, isn't it?
Yeah.
At page 289. And I'm just wondering, there's nothing in that about a briefing with regard to separated prisoners and the regime in there and all of those issues. And I think certainly I would like to see some of that covered in the course of our visit. Does anybody else have anything there?
Just have one issue, obviously, it's a correspondence from the Department of Justice just in relation to the dashboard, body scanners and the statistical evidence around the rehabilitation programmes. Disappointed that they aren't able to provide us with the information, particularly in relation to the body scanners and how long people are kept in isolation. When they did come here to the board, we were able to discuss and they been able to say that it was on average somewhere elsewhere. So obviously they don't have the statistical information to back that up. And then likewise the rehabilitation programme, they have set a date of this financial year, 24-25, to provide that type of information. So could we go back and ask them in relation to body scanners and periods of isolation? Can that data become available within 24-25? Just that there was no timeline put to it, and I'd like to see a timeline.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I think that covers us in terms of correspondence. Nobody else has anything to do.
I know it was just on that issue because I should have raised it at the Retail NI. Their report on page 457 of our pack, but it's their report and key findings. It talks about positively its facial recognition technology is having an impact. It's just to see how wide if we can ask the department in terms of the laws covering the usage of facial recognition. Because I imagine most people that are going into shops and stuff, they may see the camera, but how's that data being held? How's it being used? Where's it going? How widespread is it? Could we get an update then, particularly in advance of even meeting with Retail NI and stuff as well, just from the department in terms of what's the legislative framework for all of this, particularly around the use of AI and all these other things now and how things can be used. And as you say, the human rights implications, if we could just get some more information. Thank you.
Members Gray, yeah. Thank you. Members, can I refer you to your tabled pack? So we're looking at pages 24 to 32. The Department has issued a letter and a briefing paper to the committee regarding a potential LCM for the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill. I'd ask you to note this item, and if you're content to schedule an oral evidence session with officials for Thursday the 9th of May on this matter. You should note that officials from the Independent Monitoring Board for Prisons who were scheduled to attend the committee meeting on the 9th of May, because again we're going to be overloaded with oral evidence sessions, they've kindly agreed to reschedule their session for the following week, which would be Thursday the 16th of May. Members content? Yeah. That's great, thank you. In terms of chairperson's business then, the Vice Chair and I met the Minister of Justice on Monday to discuss the forthcoming Justice Bill and the Department's intention to bring a number of substantive amendments at consideration stage. The committee's views on this matter were relayed to the Minister, and we'll discuss that in more detail during our informal discussion after this meeting. Also, just in noting the fact that we visited the REC last week, I think it would be appropriate if we were to send a thank you letter to Jodie Kelly and Nigel Bloomer from the department for accommodating our visit last week. Members content?
Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 16 is any other business. I have one issue. Does anybody else have anything else? No? The one issue that I have is, do you remember the issue around, and it was raised again at the APG, there's an issue around students who are getting a place at the Institute. And in order to get a place at the Institute, you need to have a placement established. But there are issues now because, as was outlined at the APG, for somebody to have a placement, that firm is required to pay them full time. And I think this is an issue of people being able to join the profession. I think there's potential there for there to be a problem and for it to exclude people if they can't get a placement purely because firms can't afford to pay them. And I was wondering if, on the back of correspondence that we received from the Law Society and on this issue and previous questions we've asked of them, if we could write to the Institute and establish what is the extent of this problem, and are they seeing that their prospective students are struggling to find a placement and therefore put at risk their place in the Institute? Would that be all right?
Yep. Completely agree, because I do think it has an implication, particularly on class grounds, if you're working class background, in the judiciary more broadly, and in the system. And is it reflective of the community out there, and particularly those that go through the justice system more broadly? So I think it would be good to even hear from some of the solicitors out on the ground, because obviously, I mean, legally it's having an impact. The change in the industry over time is having an impact. Issues like this then is having an impact for them to recruit and retain people coming forward. And it really is, if you can afford it then, you know, that's where you are going through, and for the firms that can afford it. So I think it is an issue. I would be happy to write to the Institute, but maybe to try and get a flavour of the impact these issues are having on firms, you know, in the high street, as they were kind of described as by the Law Society. I think that would be good.
I think it ends up directing people to corporate law and to corporate firms. So that's all well and good, you know, but the rest of the sections of the law also need to have professionals. The other thing, it's an interesting point that you raised there, Deirdre, about class, and I'm conscious of, we've had reference to Queen's University's Pathways programme, and I think it would be useful, could we write, if members were agreed, could we write to Queen's University Pathways programme and ask them for details of their programme and who's included in that, how they reach out, just to give us some idea as to what's being done to get people into the profession, because it's a class issue. I'm also slightly concerned that there are many areas of Belfast included, but from a parochial point of view, I was not clear that East Belfast was included in that. And to be honest, there are sufficient numbers of working class people in East Belfast who should also have access to that pathway and be included in that provision. So if we can have some understanding about what that is, it would be helpful. Thank you. Anybody have anything else? No? All right. So date and time of the next meeting is, obviously we've got a strategic planning session next week. That's going to be at Stormont on the 2nd. No, that's not what is next week. This is 2nd of May, but that can't be right. It's the 9th of May.
No, it is the 2nd, I think, next Thursday.
Yeah, but that, look, it says next.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, I'm there now. Right, I'm with you now. I took my glasses off. Now I'm dependent and I can't. Everything's a blur. Right. Yes. So next Thursday, which is the 2nd, we're in the Stormont Hotel. The actual formal meeting then is going to be on the 9th of May at 2 p.m. back in this room. Committee staff emailed everybody earlier this week to ask members to stay on for a short and informal meeting in order to agree the committee's next steps regarding forthcoming justice bill. Can a few members stay for that, please? Yes. And on that basis, the committee is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Committee Room 30, Sound.